Chapter 201. Time passed by the gorgeous rainy season, and the sky of Changdao was getting clearer and clearer. In the summer after the storm, the temperature rose quickly, and the hot sun shone on every corner of Changdao. Hot, dull, and depressing had become the theme of Changdao. The news about the military exercise of Changdao had been playing on TV. At 9 o'clock in the morning, when the news channel spread the news to every city in East Island again, there were still 6 days before the military exercise of Changdao. It was like a notice, but for some people, it was the most straightforward countdown. The war was coming. In the dull and hot weather, a large area in the southwest of Changdao had been completely emptied. It was an area of about 100 square kilometers, and most of it was mountainous. Usually, there were few people in this area. After the military of East Island designated this area as the military exercise area, the scattered civilians and a small village had all been evacuated. At this moment, under the clear sky, the mountains and rivers in this area were still the same, but the residents had all disappeared. It was like a dead zone full of vitality, but no one was there. Those who didn't know would never understand, but those who knew would know that this was the battlefield that the East Island officials had set in Changdao. It was an area with a radius of 100 square kilometers. It was a magnificent place. And this area had become a place where all the superpowers were studying. The map zoomed and enlarged on the screen, and the satellite images were transmitted in real time. Every corner of the southwest of Changdao was clearly shown on the screen as it zoomed in and out. The shabby curtains in the room were casually covered, blocking the hot and dazzling sunlight from the outside. An LCD screen that occupied almost the whole wall kept flashing. Jungles, mountains, rivers, lakes, parks, clubhouses. The satellite took pictures of all the terrains within a radius of 100 square kilometers and transmitted them to the screen. As the camera moved bit by bit, every part of the terrains became clear on the screen. The light in the empty room was dim. Only the misty light on the screen flickered, reflecting the entire room. The LCD screen that occupied the front wall could be said to be a very advanced device, but it seemed very out of place in the room. In terms of area, this was a rather large room, or even a hall, but there were no luxurious decorations in the hall. The curtains by the windows were dirty, and there was a set of shabby sofas that seemed to have been abandoned in the middle of the room. There seemed to be some spider webs in the corner, and in the dim environment, the surrounding walls seemed to have mostly peeled off. In such an environment, coupled with an advanced and luxurious LCD screen that was connected to a satellite, it seemed a little strange no matter how one looked at it. Several tall and short figures stood quietly in the hall. The hall was not small, and they did not stand together. Instead, they maintained a safe distance from each other. Although they were all on guard against each other, no one revealed any hostility. The image on the screen changed. It was silent. The few figures in the hall also stood silently on the spot, as if they were inanimate objects. Time continued to move forward as the screen continued to change. Light and shadow flickered in the dim hall, and the few figures stood still, looking gloomy and weird. This area is the battlefield that East Island left for us. In the oppressive and breathless silence, a person standing in the hall suddenly spoke, breaking the silence in the hall. He was the closest to the screen, and the light and shadow on the screen shone on him. His extremely skinny body also became clear in the light and shadow. From the view of the others, he looked like a skeleton in a black robe. The body under the black robe was empty, and there was an indescribable coldness about him. "It looks big. That includes our current location." Another hoarse voice rang out. This voice was hoarse and strange, as if someone had torn off his vocal cords. It was a little unclear, and not only was it unpleasant to hear, it was even more terrifying to hear. "But I still prefer to choose my own battlefield. I don't like this place. Ben, is the Heroes Club willing to accept the arrangement of East Island?" Ben, the vice president of the American Heroes Club, and the first vice president at that, was the most powerful figure in the entire Dark World. The Heroes Club could be said to be one of the oldest superpowers in the Dark World. Its internal structure was extremely complicated, and its strength was also extremely powerful. At its peak decades ago, its power could be described as overwhelming in America, and it was the most powerful superpower in the entire Dark World. Today's Heroes Club wasn't as dazzling as it was at its peak, but it didn't go downhill either. In the past 20 years, the Heroes Club's power kept expanding. 10 years ago, it opened up Africa, 5 years ago, and it entered Northern Europe. Its sphere of power was getting bigger and bigger. In America, where they first made their fortune, the Heroes Club had maintained a fairly transcendent position, whether it was South America or North America. This time, the plot of Zhongzhou State affected the entire Dark World. The Heroes Club had already regarded the Battle of Changdao as an opportunity for them to penetrate into Asia. Ben, the first vice president, led the team to Changdao, which showed how cautious the Heroes Club was about the Battle of Changdao. The situation of the Dark World in Asia had been stable and weird for the past countless years. West Asia was in constant war, and it could be said to be the paradise of the Dark World. South Asia was full of fights for power and interests. The Dark World and politics were closely related, complicated, and sensitive. In these two places, West Asia meant chaos. Although this word was the eternal theme of the Dark World, for the dark superpowers, excessive chaos also meant limited interests and possible unexpected losses. South Asia, on the other hand, meant trouble. The political factors, religious factors, ethnic hatred, and historical grievances combined to make the entire Dark World of South Asia extremely crazy. Although the superpowers in the Dark World were unwilling to give up these two areas, they hadn't been very diligent in their management for many years. As for East Asia and North Asia, they were the most stable places. North Asia and Eastern Europe had a large territory of snow country, which was the sphere of influence of the Polar Ground Alliance, the superpower in the Dark World. In the whole of North Asia and Eastern Europe, the Polar Ground Alliance could be said to be the only superpower. In addition, Snow Country's political situation had been stable in recent years, so other superpowers couldn't find a chance to enter North Asia. Even if there was a chance, the Polar Ground Alliance, which was born as a fighting nation, would often take the initiative to attack and stop all threats outside its sphere of influence. East Asia, on the other hand, seemed to have been drifting away from the superpowers in the Dark World in the past. Because Zhongzhou State, the world's well-deserved #1 superpower in both economy and military, was located here. Whether in the past or now, Zhongzhou State had only one superpower in the Dark World. That was the Wang family of Beihai. Whether it was the former Zhuanyuantai of Kunlun, the current Kunlun city, or Sai City, they could all be said to be dark superpowers, but most of the time, in people's hearts, these superpowers were part of the special warfare system of Zhongzhou State, with a very strong official stance. The Wang family of Beihai in Zhongzhou State, the special warfare system of Zhongzhou State. The two superpowers in Zhongzhou State were enough to keep out any superpower that attempted to enter Zhongzhou State. The superpowers had fought with Zhongzhou State before, and this kind of competition still existed today. More than 20 years ago, when the Heroes Club was at its peak, it once joined forces with Fantasy World and the Polar Ground Alliance to invade Zhongzhou State. The old patriarch of the Wang family of Beihai and Li Honghe, the god of war of Zhongzhou State, joined hands and stopped several invincible realm experts outside the national border. In that battle, the old patriarch of the Wang family of Beihai fought desperately against the siege of 3 invincible realm experts and returned with serious injuries after killing 2 invincible realm experts. A few years later, he died of illness. The Heroes Club, whose power was greatly reduced, also fell from its peak. 15 years ago, Night Spirit invaded Zhongzhou State. Zhongzhou State's sword Emperor Wang Tianzong, who had just entered the Invincible Realm, held the human emperor and killed Night Spirit, an invincible realm expert of Night Spirit, at the border with one spear strike, which shocked the whole Dark World. After a short silence, the Jiang family of South America began to be active in Zhongzhou State again, but it was always difficult to make a name for itself. 5 years ago, Samsara began to cooperate with Zhongzhou State, but it was guarded by Kunlun City and the Wang family of Beihai. Although there was no major conflict among the 3 parties, they often fought secretly. Zhongzhou State was the most powerful overlord in the world today, the center of the Dark World, but also a rare pure land in the Dark World. Under the deterrence of Zhongzhou State, the whole of East Asia was peaceful. Gaoshan State's position was ambiguous, and it wavered between the Western powers and Zhongzhou State. Although East Island was powerful, most of its forces had been guarding against the invasion of Zhongzhou State. The peaceful situation had always been under the control of Zhongzhou State. For the world's major dark forces, this was not what they wanted to see, because it meant too many interests and scruples. The dark forces of Zhongzhou State were the most aggressive in the world. Among them, the Wang family of Beihai was the most powerful, followed by Sai City, and then Kunlun City. This was not only because the Wang family of Beihai had Zhongzhou State's sword emperor Wang Tianzong, who was known as the #1 expert in the dark world. More importantly, all the forces in Zhongzhou State had an extremely stable rear. This was the most unique phenomenon in the dark world. The Heroes Club dominated America, but there was the Jiang family in South America and Fantasy World in North America. The three forces entangled with each other while facing other forces. Europe could be said to be the most lively place in the dark world now. The remnants of Knight Spirit, Samsara Palace, Dark Knights, Knights Templars, the Vatican, and various consortiums were entangled with each other. There were many conflicts that even the parties involved couldn't tell how they happened. The Polar Ground Alliance dominated Snow Country and Eastern Europe, but too many historical reasons doomed the Polar Ground Alliance to face a lot of troubles. Political problems and racial problems made the development of the Polar Ground Alliance extremely bumpy. Moreover, the dark world of Northern Europe was so chaotic every day that people were stunned. The Polar Ground Alliance did not have the opportunity to get out of it. Only Zhongzhou State. Within the territory of the most powerful country in the world, there were only their own people. Although other superpowers were stationed in Zhongzhou State, they didn't amount to much at all. When they were expanding, an extremely stable rear became the most unscrupulous reason for them to act. However, other superpowers didn't dare to attack with all their strength because of the restlessness in their backyards. Almost every superpower in the dark world had felt this kind of grievance, including Samsara Palace. Behind this kind of grievance often meant concessions and compromises, which meant absolute benefits, power, wealth, or resources. In short, they were what the superpowers in the dark world pursued. In the long run, as their compromises and concessions increased, Zhongzhou State would be powerful in all aspects to the point of suffocation. How could the giants in the dark world be willing to accept this? To invade Zhongzhou State, at least the Wang family of Beihai must be stopped. The footsteps of Kunlun City must be stopped in East Asia. This was everyone's bottom line. So for many years, as long as there was a chance, the superpowers would always focus on East Asia. While the superpowers were enemies with each other, they didn't mind cooperating occasionally when facing Zhongzhou State. They appeased Gaoshan Country, drew East Island to its side, flirted with some important figures in South Asia, and even directly invaded Zhongzhou State. All these were to limit the power of Zhongzhou State in the dark world. 20 years ago, the Heroes Club went east. 15 years ago, Knight Spirit invaded. 10 years ago, the Jiang family of South America entered Zhongzhou State and quickly retreated. They took actions again and again, big and small, but every time they failed. As time went by, after Samsara and Zhongzhou State had a cooperative relationship, the superpowers in the dark world gradually quieted down. They all thought they had missed the best opportunity, but they didn't expect that Zhongzhou State would use a final battle to directly target East Island when it attracted all the attention in the dark world. East Island was in a precarious situation. Its economy and special warfare system could be said to be miserable now. But the superpowers in the dark world suddenly found that when East Island was miserable, Zhongzhou State also gave them a huge opportunity. It was an unprecedented opportunity and also an unprecedented crisis. This was the situation that the superpowers didn't want to see the most, but it was also the opportunity they had been waiting for a long time. Similarly, this was also the reason why several people from various dark superpowers gathered in a shabby house at this time. With East Island as the border, we cooperate outside the border and fight inside the border. How about that? Ben, who was wrapped in a black robe and looked like a skeleton, ignored the voices around him. He looked at the screen quietly, and after a long silence, he suddenly opened his mouth. He turned around. In the dark environment, his face was blurred, but his eyes were extremely bright, full of mysteriousness and treachery. We've been waiting for this day for a long time, haven't we? As the first vice president of the Heroes Club, Ben's strength was needless to say. He was definitely a figure who could be ranked among the superiors of the half-step invincible realm. But his fame didn't come from his strength, but from his insidiousness and cunningness. Ben's code name in the dark world was Ghost Fox, and he was good at deception, disguise, concealment, assassination, and escape. In the dark world, few legends about Ben were about his strength. He always appeared as the think tank of the Heroes Club and played the role of a schemer. This time, from the final battle of Zhongzhou State to the Battle of Changdao, the Heroes Club didn't send anyone to the scene, but it could be said that the Heroes Club was the first superpower to enter East Island. It was also he who made an appointment with these people here today. This might not prove anything, but it was enough to show that Ben's sense of smell in the general trend was extremely sharp. I agree with what Crow said. In the dark, a deep voice rang out. I reserve my opinion. I'm not as smart as you, and I can only see what's in front of me. The current situation is that East Island has already used this area as a battlefield. As for the cooperation outside the border, I don't care, but I'll report it to my superior. In the shadow, a burly bald man walked forward and said in a cold tone, So what do you mean, King Bear? Ben's tone didn't change at all, and he asked in a low voice. The order I received is to attack Samsara Palace and build a branch of the Polar Ground Alliance in East Island. King Bear's body moved agitatedly in the hall. In the shadow, he was like a grumpy monster. The attack on Zhongzhou State has nothing to do with the order I received, so, no, Mr. Bear King, I have to tell you that our cooperation doesn't conflict with the order you received. Ben smiled. King Bear of the Polar Ground Alliance could be said to be one of the most famous superiors of strength in the Dark World. He had the Thunder Vein, and it had grown several times with the progress of martial arts. His power was so strong that it was comparable to that of the ordinary superiors of the Invincible Realm. But King Bear was a straightforward person. To put it bluntly, just like what he said, he wasn't very smart. So in the Polar Ground Alliance, although he had a high position and power, every time he took action, he would be followed by a top advisor. Today, King Bear came alone, but the advisor was nowhere to be seen, which was a bit strange. I can't guess what His Highness the Alliance leader is thinking, but I think, in any case, His Highness will not let go of the opportunity to weaken Zhongzhou State. Attacking Samsara Palace, and even building the headquarters of the Polar Ground Alliance in East Island, are all intended to contain Zhongzhou State. Ben's skeleton-like skinny body floated slowly in the hall, and his tone became more and more relaxed. I know you and Crow have doubts about this battlefield, but in my opinion, this battlefield is the most suitable place for us to play. From my plan, what East Island has done is simply perfect. Perfect? Crow sneered in a hoarse voice. He was the leader of Fantasy World in East Island this time. Although his status was not as high as Ben's in the Heroes Club, it was not much different, so he spoke without scruples. Sorry, I don't see what's perfect about it. I only see the stupidity of East Island. I admit that this is their home field, and we came to Changdao to show our respect to them. But these stupid guys actually want to plan the battlefield? Who do they think they are? The Battle of Changdao is right in front of us. When and where it will happen, can East Island completely control it? Can you fly? Ben suddenly asked. What? Crow subconsciously froze for a second. Yes, I can fly. But how far can you fly? This is East Island's home field, and it's not difficult for East Island to roughly locate us. Why do you think they can't plan the battlefield for us? Ben's tone was cold. Didn't you watch the news? The spokesman of East Island Military said it was a military anti-terrorism drill. Crow, don't you understand? Military anti-terrorism drill. Crow muttered to himself, and his face suddenly changed. When there was a military drill, there would naturally be an army. This was common sense that everyone knew. Maybe you should go outside and have a look? Ben squinted his eyes and said with a smile. Crow's face was gloomy. His figure flashed, and he already appeared by the window. They were now in an old city area that was about to be demolished, just in the suburbs. When East Island planned the battlefield, they directly included this area. According to the satellite map, this old city area was just on the edge of the battlefield. At this moment, in Crow's sight, a large number of ordnance had been transported here, and soldiers in East Island military uniforms were coming slowly from afar. Armored vehicles could be seen everywhere, and it looked like they had completely surrounded this place. Crow's face was gloomy and cold, and his whole body was filled with undisguised killing intent. 10 years ago, his throat was injured, and he was almost cut with a sword. And the initiator was the current #1 superior of East Island, Tianhai Wuji, who was trapped in Zhongzhou State. Therefore, Crow didn't like East Islanders at all. Looking at the approaching army, his eyes gradually became crazy, with crazy killing intent. East Island dares to send troops to the conflict in the Dark World? Crow's smile was cruel and gloomy. Are they crazy? They're just practicing and they won't join the war blatantly. Ben shook his head. None of the superpowers that could become giants in the Dark World were simple. Behind every superpower, there were more or less political factors. In Zhongzhou State, the Wang family of Beihai was the head of the Southeast Group. Kunlun City was the highest special warfare agency in Zhongzhou State. Sai City could also dominate Mount Taibai in the northeast. The Polar Ground Alliance was in Snow Country, and its involvement with the energy oligarchs and even the military and government of Snow Country would only be more complicated. Fantasy World was deeply rooted in North America, and it was also supported by a strong power. In this case, if they used the army to solve the conflict in the Dark World, it was tantamount to suicide for East Island, which was not strong in military power. Once such a thing became a fact, it would be a war, and there would be no room for negotiation. So it was basically impossible for these soldiers to join the war. But if they didn't join the war, they could block the battlefield. In the territory of East Island, if East Island wanted to fight, everyone could see it. No matter who it was, they had to obey the will of East Island. This was the home advantage of a country. Look, what a spectacular scene. Ben came to Crow and said with a smile, "It fits perfectly with my plan. Everyone, I think we can talk about my plan now. The blockade plan." Blockade? Crow twitched the corner of his mouth. In the dim light in the hall, his expression was not obvious, but the mockery in his tone was obvious. "Ben, is your plan to block us all?" "You can say that." Ben said blandly, "At least on this battlefield we can't get out, but neither can the people of Zhongzhou State." Crow and King Bear froze at the same time. The power of Zhongzhou State is too scattered, and they are too confident. East Island, Northern Europe, North America, and their own base camp, they are indeed powerful, but they can't be so extravagant. If the people of East Island trap the elites of Zhongzhou State here. If Knights Templars and Fantasy World start to fight back against the power of the Snowdance Corps in North America and Northern Europe, what will happen to Zhongzhou State? Ben asked with a smile. "They will definitely support us," King Bear said without hesitation. This was a truth that everyone understood. As a newly established super elite legion in Zhongzhou State, the Snowdance Corps' internal lineup was completely stunning. According to the news they received, Zhongzhou State had 3 young heavenly sons, 2 invincible realm experts, a large number of young geniuses, and the backbone of the special service generation, including a super assassin like Tribulation. This force could almost be said to be the most reliable force of Zhongzhou State. Using them to deal with East Island showed how determined Zhongzhou State was this time. But no matter how determined Zhongzhou State was, it was impossible for Zhongzhou State to watch them fall into a desperate situation. Once the elites of Zhongzhou State were trapped in East Island, and Fantasy World and Knights Templars exchanged battlefields to attack Situ Cangyue and Gu Qianchuan, Zhongzhou State would definitely support them without any hesitation. "Oh, support." Ben nodded. "But what if they have a reason not to support us?" "What do you mean?" Crow's tone was cold, but his eyes gradually lit up. "For example here, Ben straightened his body and switched the screen. A map of Zhongzhou State appeared on the screen, with vast mountains and rivers and beautiful mountains and rivers. Ben pointed at the border and said indifferently, between the Snowdance Corps and the Border Praetorian Corps, which one is more important to Zhongzhou State? The Border Control Corps? Crow's and King Bear's faces changed at the same time. We are enemies of each other, but enemies also pursue common interests. On the matter of Zhongzhou State, our position is the same. So, maybe we can really cooperate for once. Zhongzhou State and Samsara dare to disperse their forces, but don't we dare to disperse our forces? Crow's eyes were shining and hesitant. He seemed to be hesitating and afraid. This is the best chance and maybe the last chance. After the fall of the Li family in Zhongzhou State, although Gu Xingyun became the war god of Zhongzhou State, he has been busy consolidating his position for many years. In the early stage, he had to face the suspicion of others in Zhongzhou State. In the middle stage, Sword Emperor Wang Tianzong killed Heavenly Spirit with one shot and stole too much of his limelight. After a few years of peace, Samsara appeared again. Kunlun City seemed to be prosperous, but in fact, it has not been comfortable these years. Otherwise, why would Gu Xingyun make so many deals with us? But this time is different. Gu Xingyun has almost consolidated his position. This time, Zhongzhou State conspires against East Island. Samsara is the leader, but Gu Xingyun is the promoter. Obviously, Gu Xingyun needs a huge victory to completely walk on the altar. If Zhongzhou State wins this time, Zhongzhou State will not only open a gap in East Island, but also let none of us have a good time in the future. Now we have such a good chance to give Zhongzhou State a fatal blow. I don't understand. Why are you hesitating? Ben took a deep breath, took out a cigarette and lit it. He said indifferently, as long as the five of us work together, no matter what Zhongzhou State does, it can't win. There was no doubt about that. No one would doubt this. Once they joined forces to invade Zhongzhou State again, Zhongzhou State was bound to be in a difficult situation. Support the Border Control Corps? The Snowdance Corps was about to give up. Support the Snowdance Corps. Once the Border Control Corps was forced, it was not just a matter of losing face because the National Gate was invaded. The Border Control Corps was the most elite combat corps of Zhongzhou State. Zhongzhou State could not afford to lose it either. Now the Snowdance Corps was acting in North America, Northern Europe, and East Island. Although they all had a tacit understanding with Zhongzhou State, as long as Zhongzhou State was strangled, those outside Zhongzhou State could not go back, and those inside Zhongzhou State could not come out. This was the real blockade. But, Wang Tianzong, Crow opened his mouth and spat out a name. The pressure that this name brought was just too great, causing Crow's tone to become sluggish and sluggish. The top expert on the divine list. The Sword Emperor of Zhongzhou State held the first murderous weapon in the Dark World, Human Emperor. This was not a name at all. It was a mountain that pressed on everyone's heart. Zhongzhou State conspired against East Island in the general trend. But all the superpowers conspired against Zhongzhou State in the general trend. But Wang Tianzong, how to deal with it? If Wang Tianzong takes action, someone will stop him. A peaceful voice suddenly sounded in the corner of the hall. Holy Light, the deputy commander of Knights Templars. Crow couldn't speak for a while. Thinking of the behemoth behind Knights Templars, which had a small territory but boundless faith, Crow seemed to understand something vaguely. We can't give up on East Island either. Holy Light said with firm and persistent eyes, we are still maintaining a cooperative relationship with East Island, and we have even paid a lot, of course. Ben said with a smile, we will all stay in East Island. As for who will go to Zhongzhou State, it's the business of His Highnesses behind us. Holy Light nodded. His white robe seemed out of place in the dark hall, filled with a kind of holy radiance. All the superpowers in the Dark World were constantly fighting for interests. But Knights Templars had always been spreading faith in fierce means. The road ahead of Knights Templars was the Holy War. It would never end. Holy Light suddenly frowned and said thoughtfully, and if this thing succeeds, I want a person. Crow said first, if this thing succeeds, you have contributed the most, and Fantasy World will have no problem with who you want. Our Jiang family has no problem with that. But we can give him to you except Li Tianlan. This guy is related to the destiny of our Jiang family for hundreds of years. If Knights Templars want him, then I have to say sorry. In the dark hall, there seemed to be a void passing through the eaves and spreading in the room. A vague illusory shadow walked into the room and said with a smile, "Sorry, I'm late." Evil. The crow subconsciously raised its voice. "We have met." In the hall, the only invincible realm killer in the dark world seemed to chuckle. "But I didn't know you well enough before. To show my sincerity, I would like to introduce myself again. Jiang Qianhua of the Jiang family of South America, code name Evil. Fantasy World. Heroes Club. Polar Ground Alliance. Knights Templars. Jiang family of South America." 5 families gathered. The living room was strangely quiet for a moment. Then holy light broke the silence again. "Sorry," he said softly but firmly, "what we want is also Li Tianlan." Jiang Qianhua said in a playful tone, "Is this an order from your chaotic highness?" Holy light narrowed his eyes slightly and looked straight at the illusory shadow in front of him. He said calmly, "No. It's His Majesty's prophecy." Everyone's face changed. Evil's expression instantly became extremely ugly. His Majesty. In the dark world, this was a very special word. And there were only 2 people who deserved this word and could make them sincerely awe. One was the Sword Emperor of Zhongzhou State, Wang Tianzong. In the misty darkness of the Wang family of Beihai, the Sword Emperor's sword was enough to make people feel desperate. And the other one? He was not in the dark world, nor was he an invincible realm expert. He controlled the most extreme and crazy dark power in the dark world, but he had been walking in the brightest light and moving forward in the praise and praise of people. From the light to a brighter light. Chapter 202. The night was as cool as water, and the moon was bright and the stars were sparse. Ninghu had the cleanest sky and coast in the whole East Island. Looking from a distance at night, the sky and the sea were closely connected, with a kind of pure and awe-inspiring power. Whether it was day or night, Wujia Mountain in the northeast of Ninghu was the best place to view the scenery. There was a cliff on the edge of Wujia Mountain near the sea, which was nearly 1,000 meters above sea level. It was the highest place near Ninghu City. The cliff was not big, but it was magnificent, especially at night. Standing on the cliff, listening to the sound of waves, the endless pure sea in front of them, and the continuous bright lights of Ninghu behind them, it was an indescribable feeling. It seemed that the prosperity of the city and the profoundness of the sea were all under their feet, which made people feel that everything in Ninghu was under their control. Qin Weibai didn't remember how long she had been standing here. From sunset to nightfall, the sky became purer and the moon became brighter. Time kept moving forward, and only the cliff under their feet remained unchanged. Qin Weibai was also motionless. She just stood there quietly, with her back to the bright lights behind her, looking at the deep sea in front of her. She seemed to be meditating, but also seemed to be observing something. The sea breeze in the middle of the night blew over with a cold chill. Qin Weibai's white retro dress and black hair danced with the wind at the same time. In the night wind, her face had a kind of almost transparent paleness, but her eyes, which were always focused, were as bright as stars, soft and persistent. The sea breeze blew over the cliff, sprinkling on Wujia Mountain with a delicate fragrance. Qin Weibai, who had been silent for a long time, finally opened her mouth and said softly, "What do you feel?" Behind her, 2 black shadows stood quietly, as if they had been completely integrated into the night. The 2 were of similar height, and their clothes were exactly the same. They both wore black cloaks, and the wide brims of the hats completely covered their faces. When they lowered their heads, their expressions were completely immersed in the darkness, and no one could see any outline. Nothing. The 2 figures in the cloaks seemed to look at each other, and then shook their heads with great tacit understanding. When the 2 of them stood together, they looked like a mirror image under the curtain of the night. However, there were some subtle differences between them. The difference was in the decoration and temperament. The figure in the black cloak on the left seemed to be straighter, carrying a long sword. Although he didn't move, there seemed to be endless sword energy hovering around him. The sword energy moved with the wind and kept gathering in the slight whistling sound, vaguely with a kind of sharpness and fierceness that went straight to the ninth heaven. In comparison, the figure under the black cloak on the right was much more peaceful. He just stood there casually, without any sharp or domineering aura. There was only a kind of steady and somewhat frightening calmness and indifference, like the vast ocean under a cliff. When the wind was calm and the waves were calm, it gave off an almost unfathomable feeling of profoundness and profoundness. Military counselor. Since the appearance of the Samsara Palace in the Dark World, they had been the two most mysterious supermasters in the Samsara. No one knew their true identities, but in the repeated confrontations in the Dark World, all the dark superpowers had felt their power. As the was. When the mysterious palace was silent, the as palace would king. Saint and military counselor were the force and wisdom of the Samsara Palace. They always appeared at the most opportune time and disappeared at the most improbable time. For several years, except for the master of Samsara Palace, no one knew their identity, and no one could capture their traces. Like now. When the cooperation between the Samsara and Zhongzhou state was at the most critical stage, no one thought that Qin Weibai, the key figure, would show up in East Island. She went from Dongdu to Changdao and finally to Ninghu. Also, no one thought that the two strongest supermasters of the Samsara, who were supposed to be preparing for the war in Changdao, had also avoided the surveillance of East Island and secretly came to Ninghu. Didn't you feel it? Qin Weibai murmured to herself. In the cool air formed by the night wind and the waves, her black hair and white clothes fluttered in the wind. Qin Weibai didn't look embarrassed at all. Instead, she stood up proudly with her tall and slender body. Facing the sea. Facing the bright moon. Facing the starry sky. The scene this time was truly as beautiful as a painting with an unparalleled celestial bearing. I felt danger. Qin Weibai breathed softly and said calmly, "Danger?" The sword intent around Saint suddenly froze. To be exact, it's the forbearance and ambition of an ambitious man for many years. Qin Weibai smiled. The moonlight shone softly, and her whole body seemed to emit a hazy and dreamy light. Looking at the sea in front of her, her tone was soft, but with a hint of indifference. This place is very special. It's so special that I've been looking for it for a long time. Ambitious man? Military counselor repeated and then smiled softly. Standing behind Qin Weibai, both military counselor and Saint were much more natural than the other supermasters. At least they weren't as cautious as the other supermasters. Even their tone was natural, as if they were chatting. In your eyes, this is not an evaluation that anyone can afford. In the Dark World, although Qin Weibai didn't have the title of a giant, she exercised the power of a giant. Standing at her current height, there were only a few people in the Dark World who could be evaluated as ambitious men by her. It's not a matter of whether I can afford it or not. Qin Weibai's tone was complicated, with mockery, coldness, and a little absent-mindedness. He is an ambitious man. He doesn't need anyone's evaluation. This place is his foundation and his hope. Unfortunately, she paused. At this moment, Qin Weibai's white dress fluttered. She turned her back to Saint and military counselor, so no one could see her expression clearly. But there seemed to be a sense of sadness spreading on the cliff. Unfortunately, I still found him. Saint and military counselor looked at each other again. After a short silence, Saint tentatively said, "Then tonight we come here, to wait for someone and kill someone." Qin Weibai's answer was simple. Saint and military counselor also fell silent and didn't ask more. The superpowers in the Dark World had their own unique labels. The Wang family of Beihai was powerful, the Jiang family of South America was low-key, the Knights Templars were fanatical, the Dark Knights were extreme, the Polar Ground Alliance was insidious, and so on, and the label of Samsara was mysterious. The way Samsara operated, the location of their headquarters, and the specific strength of the master of Samsara Palace were all unknown to the Dark World. In people's minds, as the top two supermasters in Samsara, the famous saint and military counselor, who almost never showed up, should have the status and power second only to the master of Samsara Palace and Qin Weibai. But the actual situation was the opposite. Samsara and Saint did have a high status, but they were not responsible for anything in Samsara Palace. It could be anything. In terms of actual power, any supermaster in Samsara who was below Saint and military counselor had more power than the two of them. Saint and military counselor, most of the time, played the perfect executors when Samsara needed them. They just did things regardless of the reason. When they were not needed, they were like two shadows inside Samsara Palace, almost without any trace of their existence. Especially after Qin Weibai appeared, the two of them carried out this style of only doing things to the extreme. From Changdao, they secretly escorted Qin Weibai to Ninghu. Until now, Saint and military counselor didn't know what Qin Weibai was going to do, and they didn't need to know. Wait for someone, kill someone. That was enough, and they didn't need to ask more. Time passed in silence. After midnight, the area around the cliff became quieter and quieter. Only the sound of wind and waves swept past people's ears. A fishing village less than 3 kilometers below the cliff was completely silent. After the lights went out, all the areas of Wujia Mountain became completely dark and silent. Military counselor yawned out of boredom and suddenly said, "What will you say after this is over?" "Go back home. There are a lot of things in the country. Just thinking about it gives me a headache." Saint was surrounded by sword energy, and his momentum was amazing. But his voice turned from hoarse to clear, as if he was a little helpless. Military counselor's voice also contained a hint of a smile. He nodded and said, "You've been doing a lot lately. You've been doing a lot more than me, haven't you?" "I'm not doing a lot. Things that were already in the bag could be left to the children to practice. But recently, I found that there's one more expert in hooting. You can't imagine who he is. He's a person that we all paid attention to but ignored. If he hadn't gone to Jinling as soon as he arrived in Huading, maybe I wouldn't have found him. What is hiding? Now I've seen it." "An expert? At least not much worse than you and me. But this person has always been restless. Now that he's backed by a big tree, it seems that he still won't stop. If I'm right, there will be a 3-surnamed slave in modern society." In military counselor's playful voice, Saint's body under the cloak slightly tightened. The words, 3-surnamed slave, made him immediately think of who the so-called expert was. "It's him? Did I see it right?" That's why people say that a real person doesn't show his face. In the following time, I plan to study this person carefully. But his appearance in Huading is not a bad thing for us, at least for now. Military counselor took out a cigarette and lit it. Faint smoke blew out from the cloak. He looked at Qin Weibai, who was motionless in front of him, and suddenly said with a smile, "Boss, you don't seem to be surprised by this news at all? There is no 3-surnamed slave. All these years, he has only one position, and it has never changed." Qin Weibai said faintly, "A person who can endure for many years even if his own daughter was killed, his loyalty and sacrifice are worthy of respect. But I just don't know from his standpoint, whose slave is he?" In the darkness, military counselor shrugged and seemed to smile bitterly. Samsara's almost all-pervasive intelligence system was definitely enough to make anyone feel afraid. The secret pawns of some superpowers and the truth of the things that happened many years ago were completely exposed in the search of Samsara's intelligence system. There were no secrets at all. And such a strict intelligence system had always been in the control of Qin Weibai. Military counselor thought that the news he said was shocking enough, but he didn't expect that the boss had already known the information and even knew it in more detail than him. Military counselor smiled helplessly and subconsciously glanced at Qin Weibai. Under the bright pale moonlight, this amazing woman who made several giants in the dark world fall head over heels for him only showed him the back of a peerless beauty. She faced the sea, but turned her back to the whole world. In military counselor's impression, the boss a few years ago had always been quiet and beautiful. Quiet like a statue of a god carved out of ice that had been frozen for thousands of years. Every move of his had been unattainable, perfect and noble, and could only be admired by others. A few months ago, The boss was happy. He could clearly feel the look in the boss's eyes at that time. It was a touch of satisfaction, but with unforgettable gentleness. But now, military counselor could only feel her loneliness. The loneliness that went deep into the bone and the soul. Military counselor opened his mouth and wanted to say something, but he didn't know why he couldn't say a word. Finally, he closed his mouth and kept silent. A soft phone ring sounded in the night. Qin Weibai, who had stood motionless for a long time, took out her mobile phone and answered it, but she didn't speak. On the phone, Duke's calm and steady voice sounded. "Boss, Daybreak has just responded to my request on behalf of His Highness." "What did he say?" As her white dress and hair fluttered in the wind, Qin Weibai's delicate body, which no one dared to profane, suddenly tightened. "Daybreak told me that they can get what we want, but not much, and it takes time," Duke said in a low voice. There was silence. There was a dead silence on the cliff in an instant. Qin Weibai held the phone tightly in her hand, and her body began to tremble slightly in the silence. The trembling became more and more obvious, but her tone seemed to be suppressing the storm and tide in the deep sea. "He said they can get it?" Qin Weibai asked calmly. Even through the phone, Duke still seemed to feel a great danger coming. His voice was lower, and he said carefully, "Daybreak said so." Qin Weibai nodded. After a full minute of silence, she said again, "Good. What a goodly." In the night wind, her somewhat sharp voice paused and then became absolutely calm again. "I got it," she said, and then hung up the phone. Saint and military counselor were silent. Military counselor took a slight step back. Around him, the airflow within a radius of several meters suddenly twisted violently. The sword energy around Saint swirled wildly, like a storm. The two of them didn't know what Qin Weibai's phone call meant, but they knew that the last time their boss spoke in this tone was less than 24 hours ago. The Night Spirit organization was destroyed. Saint and military counselor entered the fighting state almost immediately. At this moment, the two supermasters, no matter who they were facing, only had the fighting desire left. This time, our samsara cooperates with the mysterious ally of East Island. "Do you know what I want?" Qin Weibai took a deep breath and suddenly asked. "You want them to guarantee Li Tianlan's safety?" Military counselor said slowly. "I paid a lot just to let them protect Tianlan's safety. But other than that, I also want some other things that are very rare, but very difficult to find." Qin Weibai's tone was crisp and cold. Her pleasant voice was full of a strong and suffocating murderous aura. "I want the coldest poison and the hottest poison. Have you heard of these two things? You haven't. But why do they know what they are? And they can take them out? Huh. Clap." Qin Weibai threw the phone in her hand onto the cliff. Her delicate and perfect face was bathed in the moonlight, but there was undisguised coldness and anger in her tone. What is right and wrong? What is grievance? What is friendship? Her tone was getting louder and louder, and her rising voice echoed on the whole cliff. It was so majestic that it could break gold and crack stones. Military counselor and Saint didn't say a word. As far as they could remember, Qin Weibai had never behaved like this before. This seemed to be the first time that she did not hide her anger and indifference at all. Her venting sounded like she was interrogating them, but also with strong resentment. Qin Weibai suddenly said in a heavy tone, "I want to kill someone." "My pleasure." Saint took a step forward and said in a neither humble nor arrogant tone, "Who do you want to kill, boss?" "The real young heavenly son. Do you dare to kill him?" Qin Weibai bent down, picked up the phone on the ground, and turned on the screen. On the screen, the photo of her and Li Tianlan snuggling together immediately came into view. Qin Weibai's cold, majestic, and bright eyes softened quietly. She carefully wiped the dust off the screen, and the killing intent in her tone grew stronger and stronger. The saint remained calm and said, "It's my pleasure." "Military counselor?" Qin Weibai called out without turning her head. Military counselor smiled slightly. His tone was very implicit, but the content was straightforward and explicit. "In my heart, Tianlan is the only young heavenly son. Except for Tianlan, There are no other young masters that I can't kill. This flattery was quite shameless, but it was extremely effective. Qin Weibai's anger began to subside quickly, and even her tone became much softer. Tunlun, she murmured softly, shook her head, and said, if he doesn't die tonight, he may become Tianlan's strongest opponent in the future, the only one. Even Saint and military counselor were a little moved by such an evaluation. Li Tianlan's current potential had long been recognized. Not to mention his current realm, just in terms of potential, no one thought that he would be any worse than Wang Xingxiao and Gu Hanshan. When such a person grew up, he only needed to enter the thunder-shocking realm to make the masters of the half-step invincible realm feel tricky. Li Tianlan's strongest opponent in the future? The only one? Saint, who didn't speak much but would carefully remember every word of Qin Weibai, suddenly said, because of talent? As expected, Qin Weibai shook her head but didn't say much. Saint glanced at her thoughtfully. It's my honor to help the man you love the most. Military counselor flattered like a tide, but his voice was implicit and sincere. The man you love the most? Qin Weibai asked back. Military counselor's expression froze. He simply hid his face in the cloak, and others couldn't see it. He kept smiling and said, Boss, you don't love him? I love him. Qin Weibai nodded and said softly, it's just, do I deserve it? Do I deserve it? She asked a question, but it wasn't about military counselor or saint. It was more like she was interrogating her soul in a very serious manner. Do I deserve it? She stood silently at the edge of the cliff, proudly straightening her body. At that moment, the military counselor could clearly feel that under the boss's beautiful appearance, all the energy, qi, and spirit had been sucked out in an instant. Her entire person was filled with a kind of emptiness and despair. But saint and military counselor spoke at the same time. I'm fine. Qin Weibai suddenly came back to her senses, and she became cold and piercingly cold again. Beside the cliff, the beauty looked up at the moon. The pure blue night sky was bright, and the sparse stars were shimmering. A bright, almost dazzling star abruptly fell from the extreme end of the sky in an exaggerated arc. The star tore up the moonlight and fell into the deep sea. The general star fell, and the heavenly sun should die. Qin Weibai's beautiful face gradually bloomed with a smile that could almost topple a country. It's hard to defy destiny. It seems that tonight is a lucky night. Boss, do you also believe in destiny? Saint asked with a gentle laugh. If I didn't believe in destiny, how could I live until now? Qin Weibai's eyes were bright and lonely. She looked down. After midnight, when dawn was approaching, two vague figures finally appeared in the farthest distance of her sight. The two figures were extremely fast, and their destination was very clear. They climbed Wujia Mountain and went straight to the cliff. The figures were getting closer and closer. The silhouettes of a man and a woman gradually came into view. Saint and military counselor's eyes suddenly focused. Until this moment, they didn't know who the boss was waiting for. When military counselor and Saint secretly sneaked into Ninghu, no one noticed that a famous superior of the Wang family of Beihai's camp was also missing. Black Pupil from the Wang family of Beihai. And the one who appeared with Black Pupil was a sensitive figure like Qin Weibai who shouldn't have appeared in East Island. He shouldn't have appeared, and he shouldn't have met the current Qin Weibai in the current situation. The man and the woman moved forward quickly. Black Pupil followed them silently. The young man in front of her strode forward as if he were taking a stroll in a courtyard. The Wang family of Beihai. Chapter 203. The moonlight covered every corner of Wujia Mountain. The sea in the middle of the night gently undulated, and dense water vapor rose. In the deep night, the water in the mountain was moist, and the outside of the mountain was hazy. People on the mountain looked down the mountain. People at the foot of the mountain looked up at the top of the mountain. They were all sceneries. Qin Weibai was motionless. Her calm gaze seemed to pass through the night and fell directly on Wang Xiaoyao and Black Pupil. Black Pupil, who was walking up, instinctively stopped and looked up at the white clothes on the cliff at the top of the mountain. Her black pupils, which could hardly see any white of her eyes, flickered with dim light, mysterious and quiet. Her white clothes and long hair fluttered in the wind. Her flawless and delicate face. Her eyes were as clear as water but cold and bright. All the scenes on the top of the mountain appeared in Black Pupil's sight. Her dark eyes even clearly reflected Qin Weibai's figure. They were like 2 white dots in his pupils, and only 2 white dots. All the scenes on the cliff disappeared. In a trance, it seemed that only her figure stood quietly, bathed in the moonlight between heaven and earth. She was proud, indifferent, perfect, and sharp. Unparalleled in the world. That feeling went far beyond the so-called charm and beauty, but became a shock that people dared not touch and profane. Qin Weibai. Black Pupil subconsciously lowered her head, avoided the gaze on the mountain, and asked. Among the many experts of the Wang family of Beihai, Black Pupil was not the strongest, but she was not the worst. But she was definitely one of the people who left Beihai province the least. She had heard of the title of the first beauty in Zhongzhou state, but she had never had the chance to see it. Until now, she really understood that excessive beauty could also make people feel fear and danger. Wang Xiaoyao responded in a low voice, and there was a struggle in his eyes. Black Pupil's eyebrows moved, and a dark cloud gathered between her eyebrows, obscure and strong. The intelligence of the Wang family of Beihai still clearly showed that Qin Weibai was still in Zhongzhou state. At this time, she appeared in East Island without anyone knowing, which was a very unusual thing. In other people's cognition, Wang Xiaoyao, who was also in Zhongzhou state, secretly sneaked into East Island at this time and contacted Qin Weibai late at night, which suddenly made this matter more unusual. Qrome sighed softly. She wanted to say something but stopped on second thought. In the end, she didn't say anything. When Firmament and the Enchantress were both in East Island, Wang Xiaoyao, who came to Changdao secretly, only brought her here, which was enough to explain some problems. This night was destined to be unusual. Some things that should have happened would inevitably be foreshadowed in the general trend, and no one would be able to stop them. Ahead, Wang Xiaoyao kept walking. Without the slightest hesitation, Qrome followed. She couldn't stop because the person in front of her was still going up. She did not know how far the man in front of her would go, but as long as she was still here, she would follow him. Even if she was alone. Wang Xiaoyao walked through the path covered with stones and rushed to the cliff with the shortest route in the shortest time. His forehead was already sweating. The cliff was extremely high. Compared to the surrounding Wujia mountain, it was unique. The whistling night wind blew past the top of the cliff. His sweat quickly became cold, but the coldness did not disappear. Instead, it seeped into his skin and continued to permeate his body. In the late summer night in the cold wind by the sea, Wang Xiaoyao felt like falling into the ice field, and his whole body was extremely cold. The corner of his mouth moved. Looking at Qin Weibai in front of him, his eyes were complicated and he said softly, "There are too many people here, so I'm late." The meaning of this sentence was extraordinary. At least it meant that Wang Xiaoyao wanted to avoid more than some monitoring forces of East Island. It was quiet on the cliff. Military counselor and saint moved their bodies quietly and stood on the left and right sides behind Qin Weibai. In the whistling wind, their bodies seemed to gradually twist and eventually became blurred, like 2 shadows standing behind Qin Weibai. Qin Weibai's mood seemed to be still agitated. Looking at the sparkling sea under the moonlight, she was silent for 5 or 6 minutes before she turned around and said calmly, "If you come a little later, we don't have to talk about our cooperation." Cold, straightforward, and direct. Black Pupil, who was standing behind Wang Xiaoyao, raised her eyebrows. Her dark pupils looked even more terrifying in the slightly strange environment. She forced herself to endure the sudden anger in her heart, took a deep breath, and remained silent. Obviously, there was no room for her to speak in this meeting tonight. Very few people knew about this meeting tonight, and even fewer people could understand the specific meaning of this meeting. Wang Xiaoyao came to see Qin Weibai, which was equivalent to directly contacting the will of Samsara Palace. But Samsara Palace directly contacting Wang Xiaoyao. And only Wang Xiaoyao. Cooperation. Wang Xiaoyao didn't care about the impoliteness in Qin Weibai's tone. His face was a little pale, with obvious hesitation and struggle, and he muttered to himself. He smiled bitterly and said, "Little Bai, do you know that I would rather not have such a cooperation?" "I'm sorry." Qin Weibai was silent for a while, reached out to tidy up her hair that was blown by the wind, and said blandly, "I don't know." Her tone was calm, but there was no emotion in it. Between the lines, there was a sense of alienation that kept people thousands of miles away. This was an attitude that was enough to make any man feel frustrated and even desperate. But it was also an attitude that Wang Xiaoyao was used to. As the younger brother of the Sword Emperor of Zhongzhou State, Wang Xiaoyao's noble identity was self-evident. With his identity, he had pursued a woman for several years, but there was no scandal. This could fully explain how indifferent the woman behind this obsessive, unrequited love was. "Yeah, you don't know," Wang Xiao muttered to himself, and his eyes became more and more gloomy. If he hadn't really fallen in love with the woman in front of him, how wonderful would the meeting tonight be? The word love turned all the plans into contradictions and entanglements. It made him want to retreat when he could only move forward. Was it all worth it? Wang Xiaoyao was in a trance. Qin Weibai's clear voice continued to ring. "I don't need to know. But I can roughly understand." "You don't understand." Wang Xiaoyao shook his head subconsciously. For hundreds of years, the Wang family of Beihai has been the greatest family in the dark world. "Do you know why?" Qin Weibai suddenly asked. As soon as these words came out, not only Wang Xiaoyao, but also Black Pupil, and even Saint and Military Counselor were obviously stunned. "Of course I know." In an instant, the contradiction in Wang Xiaoyao's eyes disappeared. He stared at Qin Weibai in front of him, opened his mouth, but could not continue to speak. "I also know." Qin Weibai's expression was still indifferent, faintly perfect, but the brilliance in her eyes was getting brighter. "So, I still understand. This has something to do with our cooperation, but it also has nothing to do with it, right?" Wang Xiaoyao was silent. "How are the preparations going?" Qin Weibai turned around again, but her eyes were no longer looking at the sea. Instead, she stood at the highest point, quietly observing the small village shrouded in moonlight a few kilometers away. "I have got the half-style shadow formula from Li Tianlan." Wang Xiaoyao shook his head absent-mindedly. "It will take some time. Your plan needs time and opportunity. Tianlan may be the opportunity you have always wanted." Qin Weibai nodded and said. Wang Xiaoyao clenched his fists, feeling a little uneasy and irritated. With a wry smile, he took out a cigarette and lit it. He took a deep breath and said, "What do you need me to do?" Tonight's meeting was actually simple but not simple. He cooperated with Samsara, so he needed Qin Weibai's promise, and Qin Weibai needed his sincerity. It could be regarded as taking what they needed. But she asked him to meet here. Wang Xiaoyao looked around. The sea, the beach, the cliff, the lights in the distance. He couldn't figure out how to express his sincerity here. This kind of sincerity, which was similar to a pledge of allegiance, could not be shown by doing something casually when standing at the height of him and Samsara. "I want you to help me kill a young man." Qin Weibai looked at the quiet village in the distance and said seriously, "Okay." Wang Xiaoyao was a little surprised. It seemed too simple to just kill a person. He nodded and said, "I'll let Black Pupil do it." "What I mean is, I want you to help me kill a young man. Right here." Very calmly, Qin Weibai repeated the sentence again. Wang Xiaoyao's eyes narrowed slightly. Vaguely, he could feel that the sincerity he wanted to express did not seem to be so simple, and the key to this sincerity was the young man Qin Weibai wanted him to kill. "You want me to do it myself?" Wang Xiaoyao asked. "A real young heavenly son. Black Pupil is no match for him." Qin Weibai said softly without batting an eyelid. The amount of information contained in this seemingly light sentence could be described as stormy waves. No matter how calm Wang Xiaoyao was, he couldn't help but change his face. A young heavenly son that Black Pupil was no match for? How young was he? There seemed to be only a few such characters in the entire dark world, and they were basically the kind of young people who were about 30 years old and not young. As for the younger ones, Wang Xingxiao, who was 23 years old and only a few months away from creating a new record, had now reached the thunder-shocking realm. Wang Xingxiao, who had wind and thunder veins and top-notch inheritance and amazing talent, could defeat most experts at the peak of the thunder-shocking realm. But in the face of Black Pupil, who was infinitely close to the half-step invincible realm, he still didn't have much confidence. A young heavenly son that even Black Pupil was no match for? Wang Xingxiao, Li Tianlan, Gu Hanzhan. These three names first came to Wang Xiaoyao's mind. It was naturally impossible for Wang Xingxiao. Qin Weibai would not ask him to kill his own nephew unless she was crazy. It was even more impossible for Li Tianlan. Gu Hanzhan was definitely no match for Black Pupil. In East Island, Mai Shiranui, the young palace master of Yohua Palace, was amazing enough, but compared with Black Pupil, she was much worse. Crown Prince Rend could no longer be regarded as a young man. As for other forces, they naturally had their own young experts, but most of them were protected. At least in East Island, where the general situation was unclear, the probability of their appearance was very small. In this way, who did Qin Weibai want to kill? And she wanted him to do it himself. Wang Xiaoyao was very clear that at least in the information of the major forces, his combat capability was far inferior to Black Pupil's. Wang Xiaoyao was an expert. In Zhongzhou State, he could be as famous as Bai Yuming, which was enough to show his extraordinary talent. But Bai Yuming was now only in the stabilization phase of the thunder-shocking realm, which was nearly 2 small realms lower than Black Pupil. The difference between the two was obvious. But now Qin Weibai's meaning was already very sure that Wang Xiaoyao's strength was still above Black Pupil's. Wang Xiaoyao's eyes flickered. Qin Weibai's short sentence contained at least 3 meanings. She knew that he was hiding his strength. East Island now had an unknown young heavenly son. And behind the young heavenly son, there must be an unknown force. Before he came to East Island, he knew that the situation in East Island was complicated. But only when he really came here could he really understand how complicated this chaotic situation was because of the general trend. Who is he? Where is he? Wang Xiaoyao calmed himself down and asked. He's here. Qin Weibai said blandly, if you come a little later, you may miss it. Who is he? Wang Xiaoyao still insisted on this question. Qin Weibai fell silent, making it clear that she did not intend to tell him anything else. Little Bai, Wang Xiaoyao hesitated for a moment and finally said, what do you want to do? There was something wrong with the two of them meeting here, but the most wrong thing was Qin Weibai. It was really too strange for her to show up here. At least Wang Xiaoyao couldn't figure it out. Both of them had their own secrets. But now it seemed that Qin Weibai had known about his plan, but he knew nothing about Qin Weibai's purpose. This feeling made Wang Xiaoyao instinctively feel a little uneasy. I don't want to do anything big. Qin Weibai said blandly, everything I'm doing now is just to change my fate. Wang Xiaoyao stopped talking. In Qin Weibai's ambiguous answer, he clearly felt the danger and even felt trouble. If everything was related to himself, he would agree without hesitation. He didn't even need any cooperation, just because this was Qin Weibai's request. But behind a young heavenly son, there might be too many things, and it might also be related to the entire Wang family of Beihai. He had to be cautious about such cooperation. And from the beginning, Wang Xiaoyao's attitude toward this cooperation and Qin Weibai was a little vague. So, what if I don't do it? Our cooperation is cancelled. Wang Xiaoyao was silent for a moment and suddenly said. Qin Weibai stood motionless, as if she didn't hear Wang Xiaoyao's words. She just stood there without saying a word. The atmosphere on the cliff suddenly froze. Time passed slowly, and Qin Weibai didn't mean to speak. But saint and military counselor standing on both sides behind her gradually became clear and finally blurred. But this time the blurriness was not to deliberately hide their existence. In an instant, the cliff was covered by an endless amount of sharp sword intent. Saint's figure had completely disappeared, and the whole cliff became a world of swords. The sword intent surged and grew endlessly. Military counselor's figure also began to blur. In the sword intent, he seemed to have become a black hole, suppressing and crazily devouring everything around him. So, I have no choice, right? Wang Xiaoyao laughed at himself and looked at Qin Weibai. Yes. Qin Weibai's tone was indifferent, with a high and mighty reservation. If the target dies, you and I cooperate. Or if the target dies, you also die. So many choices. Wang Xiaoyao nodded and looked along Qin Weibai's line of sight. His eyes also fell on the village a few kilometers away. He frowned slightly and said, "Where is he?" Qin Weibai pointed and said slowly, "He's coming." Looking in the direction of Qin Weibai's finger, Wang Xiaoyao could vaguely see a figure walking slowly from the village at the end of his sight. Because of the distance, Wang Xiaoyao could only recognize that it was a figure. "Kill him." Qin Weibai said, "You and I cooperate." Wang Xiaoyao nodded in silence and narrowed his eyes slightly. The sea breeze blew past with a fishy and salty smell. The cold air pervaded the air, carrying with it a hidden killing intent. As dawn approached, the bright moon slowly fell from the sky. The moonlight gradually dissipated. The sun had not yet risen. The figure that walked out of the village was alone, silently walking in the darkest hour of the day. There was no dawn. Chapter 204. 11,000-word chapter. The sea breeze stopped. The sound of the tide receded. The thick night gradually covered the receding moonlight. In the darkest night before dawn, the whole world seemed to return to the most oppressive silence. The last ray of moonlight sprinkled on the surface of the sea. The blue waves slowly undulated, and the clear and crystalline waves brought along a surging cold radiance, illuminating the entire beach in a misty haze. In the dim light, the figure on the beach seemed to be strolling along with the cool breeze, neither fast nor slow. The light flowed in Black Pupil's dark pupils. She quietly glanced at it, and her face suddenly changed slightly, with an unconcealable surprise. As the moonlight receded, the visibility under the curtain of night had been reduced to the minimum. However, that person was at the extreme end of the line of sight, still out of everyone's observation range. So until now, no one had been able to see who the young heavenly son that Qin Weibai had mentioned was. But Black Pupil was different. Her dark eyes, which had almost no white, looked creepy, but she was gifted. From childhood to adulthood, her sight range and visibility were much stronger than others. Because of this visual advantage, Black Pupil became one of the most valuable talents in the Wang family of Beihai. In terms of strength, Black Pupil, who was infinitely close to the half-step invincible realm and still had room for improvement, was enough to make no one dare to look down on her. And because of her visual advantage, she was also one of the most terrible snipers in the Wang family of Beihai. Therefore, under the circumstance that no one could see clearly in the distance, through the dark night, only Qurome could clearly see the beach in the distance and the figures in the distance. Black Pupil's pupils contracted obviously, and her eyes became more and more focused. In her sight, the so-called young heavenly son was more than young. He was completely a teenager. At a distance of nearly 300 meters, Black Pupil could clearly see the figure and appearance of the other party under the focus of her eyes. In her sight, it was a face that was not only young but also childish. 16 years old? 17 years old? Or 18 years old? He walked on the beach with a calm face, wearing the junior high school uniform of East Island, carrying a school bag, and seemed to be on his way to school. For a moment, Black Pupil only felt extremely absurd. It was absurd to go to school so early. However, it was equally absurd for Qin Weibai, the second in command of the Samsara Palace, to kill a junior high school student. In such an important cooperation between Wang Xiaoyao and Samsara, it was absurd for him to sacrifice the life of such a child as a pledge of allegiance. It was ridiculous for Qin Weibai to say that she was no match for this child. Qurome stood there a little sluggishly and forgot to speak for a while. The young man on the beach was getting closer, and the others could see him clearly. "Is that him?" Wang Xiaoyao finally saw the teenager on the coast clearly. His eyes widened, and he looked at Qin Weibai in astonishment, with undisguised suspicion. Not only Wang Xiaoyao, but even the deeply hidden aura of saint and military counselor also fluctuated slightly. Obviously, they were also a little incredulous. This was a young man who still looked childish. He had an average height and appearance, but he looked very clean. Be it his clothes or face, they were all very clean. But other than that, there seemed to be nothing else worth paying attention to. The deep night, the boundless sea. In the huge environment, the thin and small figure walked quietly. It was calm, but there was a hint of loneliness. Qin Weibai's bright and condensed eyes were still clear, but there was a little trance in them. At this moment, she thought of Li Tianlun. The man who had been destined in her destiny, a few years ago, many years ago, was he also like the young man in front of her, walking alone and calmly in the vast mountain forest? How is this person? Qin Weibai was silent for a while and suddenly asked. Her face was calm and perfect, but her heart was always surging violently. Ordinary. Wang Xiaoyao shook his head and glanced at Qin Weibai beside him. Is it possible that you found the wrong person? Qin Weibai raised the corner of her mouth with a sneer, indescribably arrogant and cold. She stared at the young man's eyebrows and eyes at the foot of the mountain seriously. Perhaps it was because of the first impression. At this time, the other person's eyebrows and eyes were so clear and even a little dazzling. I can't see clearly, Saint suddenly said. The sharp sword intent hovering around him had completely become dormant. His calm voice seemed to be faintly hesitant. I can't see clearly either. It's very strange. Can't see clearly? Can't see clearly? Wang Xiaoyao frowned and turned his eyes again to the young man who might die in his hands. The young man by the sea was getting closer and closer. At a distance of tens of meters, they could almost see every expression on his face. Ordinary, calm, and dull. The young man seemed to be thinking about something and looked a little lost in thought. It's very strange. Military counselor's voice sounded in his ear, with a trace of unexplainable doubt. He looks too ordinary, so ordinary that it's a little fake? No, this feeling is very strange. Real and unreal. Qin Weibai said softly without batting an eyelid. Wang Xiaoyao, who had been silently observing the young man, suddenly trembled, and his pupils suddenly contracted. He finally found the young man's abnormality. The night was spreading. The waves were undulating. The young man in front of him walked unhurriedly on the beach, but his every move brought a clear and almost strange sense of reality. Everything about him seemed to be placed in front of them and could be seen through at a glance. But if they observed carefully, they would find that the so-called seeing through was no different from not seeing at all. He was very real, but his whole person did not have any emotion or temperament. Between the real and the unreal, there was no disguise, no self, only a very real emptiness. It was like a mass of air. He clearly saw it, but it seemed that he didn't see it. It was the first time that Wang Xiaoyao had felt this strange feeling. For a moment, all the hair on his body even stood up, and he even felt that he had seen a ghost. Young heavenly son? Young heavenly son? Qin Weibai's evaluations suddenly became very heavy in his heart. His face was solemn and he slowly said, "This person is not simple. Who the hell is he?" Such a person made him instinctively feel strange and dangerous, even frightened. It was almost an intuition. On the surface, Wang Xiaoyao's strength was at the stabilization phase of the thundershocking realm, but he was already in his early 30s, and his actual strength had already reached the half-step invincible realm. Although he hadn't reached the level of saint and military counselor yet, he didn't have to be afraid of a young man. What he worried and even feared was the future of the young man in front of him. If he was really a young heavenly son, he would definitely be a figure that no one dared to ignore in the dark world in the future. Qin Weibai didn't speak, just quietly watched the young man getting closer and closer. The soft wind blew her clothes. In a trance, this extraordinary woman who was regarded as a goddess by countless people in the dark world became more and more ethereal and dreamy. No one knew what the young man in front of him meant to the dark world, to East Island, and to the upcoming battle of Changdao. Military counselor didn't know, neither did Saint. If Li Tianlan was the target that Qin Weibai had to protect at all costs in the Battle of Changdao, the young man in front of him was the target that she would kill at all costs. The two seemed to be unrelated, but were they really? The memories rang clearly with the sound of the tide, and then turned into a huge wave, crazily attacking all her reason. In fact, it had nothing to do with the poison of coldness and the poison of heat, and it had nothing to do with the deal between Samsara and that mysterious force. Even if there was nothing, she had to kill the young man in front of her. It was just that after the two kinds of strange poisons, her mentality had completely changed. Should I do it now? Wang Xiaoyao hesitated and asked. He still didn't know the strength of the young man in front of him, but the more he observed, the more urgent he felt. There seemed to be an intuition that reminded him of the threat that the young man in front of him posed to him, so he couldn't wait to make a move. He took a step forward, and a trace of killing intent flashed in his eyes. This killing intent suppressed infinite sharpness, but it was very weak, so weak that it was almost imperceptible. But almost at the same time, the young man, who was walking forward silently and seemed to be distracted, suddenly stopped. They were dozens of meters apart, separated by the darkest night. The young man instantly raised his head and looked at the cliff. All of a sudden, Wang Xiaoyao only felt that he saw two stars. It was a pair of eyes that suddenly condensed all the brilliance, clear and calm with a trace of playfulness and playfulness. The afterglow of the moon seemed to concentrate on him all at once, making him look more real and more illusory. "Who's there?" He slowly opened his mouth, and his soft voice carried the hoarseness of a young boy's voice changing period. It was as gentle as the night wind blowing in the ear. Such a keen perception was simply incredible. Although the two sides were only dozens of meters apart, that was only a horizontal distance. One was above and the other was below, and there was a cliff rising from the ground. At such a distance, the other party could instantly lock their position with a trace of killing intent. It was simply... Wang Xiaoyao's eyes had completely condensed, and the fierce killing intent flashed in his pupils. He took another step forward and was about to jump off the cliff. "Saint." Qin Weibai suddenly spoke softly. Saint silently took a step forward. "You go." Qin Weibai said faintly, "Make it quick." Wang Xiaoyao was stunned, and then he understood. Even if Qin Weibai wanted him to kill the teenager below, she didn't want him to do it now. It seemed that Qin Weibai just wanted him to end the teenager's life instead of fighting with him in person. He raised his eyebrows and didn't say anything. Obviously, the teenager below had secrets, and Qin Weibai didn't seem to want to expose these secrets, so she asked Saint to do it. At this moment, Wang Xiaoyao's heart was full of strange feelings. In the current situation of East Island, who on earth was this teenager that Qin Weibai secretly came to Ninghu to kill? What impact could it have on the current situation? In recent years, Wang Xiaoyao had learned too much about this woman who made him unable to extricate himself from the first time he met her. He could be sure that if the teenager below was an insignificant person who had nothing to do with the general trend, even if he was a young heavenly son, Qin Weibai wouldn't be in a hurry to kill such a person. "Okay." Saint responded faintly, took a step forward, and rushed off the cliff without hesitation. His body wrapped in a black cloak fell at a high speed, and the sword energy, like a flash flood, stirred the night and rushed directly to the teenager by the beach. The dull thunder suddenly rolled across the sky, and the thunder fell. The sword energy tore the night, and the hundreds of meters of the night sky was instantly dyed into a strange blue curtain by the sword energy. The curtain was like lightning, with a fierce killing intent that could destroy everything. The sword energy was majestic and mighty. In an instant, the teenager who had stood quietly by the sea completely changed. His figure became clearer under the blue light curtain, but his momentum became more and more illusory. Under the sharp light of the mighty sword energy, the teenager had a vague feeling that he was almost dissipating between heaven and earth. Only his eyes were still bright and clear. They passed through the light curtain made of sword energy, through the night, and directly shot to the cliff. It was clear and calm, but it was filled with a kind of suppressed ferocity. Saint's body had landed. In front of him, The light curtain made of sword energy was still expanding, and almost in the blink of an eye, it completely enveloped the teenager. The sword chi was wreaking havoc in the air, and the sand on the beach was shot up into the sky by the sword chi, flying hundreds of meters into the sky. Countless dark blue electric arcs danced wildly, and the whole battlefield instantly turned into a strange and dazzling world. In the blurred light and shadow, the pair of clear but ferocious eyes became brighter. The teenager didn't move, and he didn't take out any weapon. He just threw away the school bag in his hand and put his hands together. At the moment when the sword energy was about to fall, the teenager's hands suddenly made a complicated and strange emblematic gesture. This was a unique skill that had never appeared in the dark world. It was strange. It was unknown. Formless seal. Heaven and earth were formless, and all living beings were formless. The sword energy, which was as dense as a curtain, rushed past the teenager almost violently. The teenager's body seemed to flicker very slightly. The next second, his extremely thin body had appeared directly in front of Saint. He was as fast as a ghost. Wang Xiaoyao, who had been staring at all this, didn't even see how he avoided the violent sword energy for a while. The teenager's hands were still put together, his fingers changed, and a new emblematic gesture was suddenly formed again. The temperature in the air plummeted. The midsummer suddenly turned into cold winter, and the world seemed to become absolutely indifferent. Crack! In the clear sound, the high sky above suddenly condensed into a layer of ice. The ice spread wildly and almost instantly spread to a range of hundreds of meters. The emblematic gesture in the teenager's hands was completely formed. Boom! The ice of hundreds of meters shook violently and then completely shattered. Countless sharp pieces of ice, like spears, kept falling from the sky with a sharp whistle. Heartless seal. The soft wind, the dark night, and the cold moon. Everything disappeared in an instant, and there was only the violent killing intent and extreme indifference left on the whole battlefield. Swish! Without any hesitation, Saint pulled out the long sword behind him at the first time. The boss said to finish the battle as soon as possible, so from the beginning he went all out. The light on the bright sword edge jumped, and a touch of dangerous blue condensed to the extreme immediately filled the sword edge. The teenager and Saint were already very close. When the sword edge was raised, the tip of the sword almost touched the teenager's chest. The blue edge silently cut through the teenager's school uniform, and the teenager's figure had already soared into the sky. What moved with his body was still the emblematic gesture. His emblematic gesture had become more and more complicated, and the fast emblematic gesture had brought out a large number of clear shadows. It went up. It kept going up. Saint raised his sword and looked up. The teenager's figure had appeared in the air at a height of nearly 100 meters. The emblematic gesture was completely condensed. Infinite seal. Boom! There was a sudden burst of thunder at the highest point of the sky. A blue and purple light spot suddenly appeared high in the sky and fell straight down from the sky. The light spot kept getting bigger, and in the blink of an eye, it became a thick and almost terrifying lightning crossing the sky and the earth. Thunder-shocking realm. Except for Qin Weibai. Everyone's face changed completely. This was not even the most basic thunder-shocking realm, but an expert who was infinitely close to the peak of the thunder-shocking realm. A teenager in the thunder-shocking realm? How could this be possible? How on earth could his body bear the power of the thunder-shocking realm? The look in Saint's eyes also changed. He had already overestimated the teenager in the sky, but he did not expect that the other party was actually close to the peak of the thunder-shocking realm. When Qin Weibai said that Black Pupil was no match for him, Saint did not think much about it. He thought that the other party was at most at the peak of the fire-flaming realm, or similar to the state of Li Tianlan in the half-step thunder-shocking realm. If he was a real heavenly son, that kind of strength was enough to barely defeat Black Pupil. Before the battle, he never thought that a teenager in his teens would have the strength infinitely close to the peak of the thunder-shocking realm. What did a heavenly son close to the peak of the thunder-shocking realm mean? It meant that the other party was enough to pose an absolutely fatal threat to him. On the cliff, Military counselor subconsciously took a step forward. Wang Xiaoyao and black pupil's killing intent was no longer concealed. Especially Wang Xiaoyao, his whole body was cold, and for the first time he felt bone-chilling fear. A 10-year-old expert at the peak of the thunder-shocking realm, not to mention how his body could bear this power, this talent was enough to make everyone's scalp numb. At this age, he had reached this realm. How old could he be when he entered the invincible realm? 25 years old? 28 years old? With such talent, he seemed to be stronger than Wang Shengxiao and Li Tianlan. If he grew up, he would be a huge threat to everyone. Everyone. Boom! The violent thunder came down from above, and the huge lightning seemed to fall from the end of the sky. The area with a radius of tens of meters was completely shrouded by this lightning that had expanded to the limit. Looking from above, this was completely a beam of light that broke through the confinement of heaven and earth, with the power to destroy everything. This was the real power of heaven and earth. The teenager's hands still maintained the gesture, and his expression was cold. At this moment he was floating in the air, and his whole body was surrounded by lightning. He was as majestic as a god. The huge lightning fell from the sky and shrouded the surroundings. There was no way to avoid it. In the center of the lightning, Saint suddenly straightened his body, raised his arm, and shook his sword. There was a sudden roar in the center of the lightning, and the ordinary long sword in Saint's hand was directly shattered. With him as the center, the air within hundreds of meters suddenly twisted and rotated crazily. Countless icicles falling from the sky instantly turned into powder. Saint's body did not move, but a storm hundreds of meters high rose around him. The storm changed from twisting to a deep blue. Endless thunder and lightning roared in the storm, and the whole space seemed to be frozen. The lightning fell from above. The storm rose from the ground. Wind and thunder gathered. The fierce whistling sound echoed around with a sharp sound that almost pierced people's eardrums. A large amount of sand was rolled into the air, and the trees and grass were completely smashed in the expanding airwaves. The impact of the wind and thunder hit everything around, and the whole cliff was shaking violently. Military counselor was calm. The airflow in front of him was twisted, and it firmly protected Qin Weibai. The desperate power below kept colliding, and the wind and thunder roared. But under the protection of military counselor, Qin Weibai's hair did not even flutter. The teenager's figure kept floating with the wind, and it seemed more strange and empty. He made a gesture with both hands. The air seemed to be completely torn apart, and the violent seaside seemed to have fallen from the cold winter to the hell. The cold wind rolled up the sand and whistled up. The storm around Saint was circling, but the whole space turned into deep blue with the teenager's gesture. In an instant, the last gesture in the teenager's hands was formed. The storm around Saint suddenly stagnated. Almost at the same time, a majestic divine light that could not be looked at directly suddenly flashed in Qin Weibai's bright eyes. The dead spirit's seal. The battlefield suddenly quieted down. As if a dull wind was blowing slowly, with extreme coldness and death aura, the whole deep blue space suddenly burst into pieces. Endless lightning swept everything in an instant, and the whole sea became a world full of lightning. The storm around Saint was torn into pieces, and even the sword energy almost disappeared. The teenager who had been making gestures looked slightly pale, and he finally stopped for a while. Saint's figure, which had rushed into the air, landed again. He raised his head and looked at the teenager in the air quietly. But under the cover of the cloak, the red blood kept flowing down the corner of his mouth, as if it would never stop. What kind of unique skill is this? Wang Xiaoyao kept taking several deep breaths, and then he said with some difficulty, "There were countless unique skills in the dark world, but some of them were not powerful, just because the people who used them were different, so they could shock the world. Some unique skills were extraordinary, and in the hands of experts, they were more fierce and domineering. Only a few unique skills shocked the world, and they belonged to the top inheritance. In the hands of experts, their power was simply the best in the generation. For example, the 6 paths of reincarnation sword of the Wang family of Beihai. For example, the 24 moves of sword of the Li family. For example, the 10 skills of true martial arts of Kunlun City. He had never heard of this set of gestures of the teenager in front of him, but judging from its power, it was so domineering. He had never heard of such an inheritance before, and it was unimaginable. He hurt Saint with the strength less than the peak of the thunder-shocking realm. Even if he was a young heavenly son, it was enough to shock people. Who was Saint? The first supermaster of Samsara, one of the strongest experts under the invincible realm. In the dark world, he could be as famous as Gong Sun Chi, the azure dragon of Zhongzhou State, Tribulation, the king of Shadow, and Wei Kunlun, the Nirvana swordmaster of Zhongzhou State. He belonged to the top superior of the half-step invincible realm, and he had even vaguely broken through the limit of the half-step invincible realm, but he had not really reached the invincible realm. Wang Xiaoyao did not deny the teenager's talent, but without the top inheritance of martial arts, it was impossible for him to do this. I heard my sister talk about it. Qin Weibai sighed softly. This is the immortality seal. Wang Xiaoyao was stunned. He had never heard of this name. The master of Samsara Palace mentioned it? He looked at Qin Weibai and asked subconsciously, what is the immortality seal? I don't know martial arts, so I can't tell the principle. It should be imitating heaven and earth, integrating heaven and earth. It belongs to the category of momentum, pure momentum. Qin Weibai shook her head. The 6 paths of reincarnation of the Wang family of Beihai was the combination of strength and intent. It broke out in an instant and sublimated to the extreme. The 24 moves of Sword of the Li family was the combination of intent and momentum. It broke everything and was unparalleled in the world. But the immortality seal in front of him was just seeking momentum, pure momentum. They were different paths of martial arts, and it was hard to tell which was better. When they reached the extreme, they all had the power of the generation. Wang Xiaoyao's face was a little pale. He had never heard of the immortality seal. The strength of the person who created this unique skill was simply unimaginable. Sure enough, it was not so easy to cooperate with Qin Weibai. He even felt that he had caused a huge trouble. What else do you know about the immortality seal? Wang Xiaoyao was silent for a moment and looked at Qin Weibai seriously. I don't know much. I'm not very interested in martial arts. I just heard it from my sister casually. The immortality seal should have 12 seals and 3 comprehensive moves. I don't know the rest. Qin Weibai's tone was cold. Then, Wang Xiaoyao looked at the teenager floating in the air, wanting to say something but stopping on second thought. If it's him, he can at most use 9 styles, and there's also a comprehensive style. That's the limit. Qin Weibai seemed to know what he wanted to ask. She said indifferently, it's already the 4th move. The conversation between the two finally attracted the teenager's attention. In the silence, the teenager's body floating in the air suddenly floated up again. The lightning almost completely wrapped his whole body, making him look like a thunder god who controlled thunder and lightning, fierce and indifferent. In the lightning, the teenager's height was already as high as the cliff. They looked at each other. The teenager's indifferent eyes suddenly flashed a trace of fierce killing intent. He sneered and said, Qin Weibai? Wang Xiaoyao? What a big battle. Is the one down there the military counselor? Or a saint? Have you thought about the consequences when you deal with me? It was standard, but it was standard and a little weird Chinese. Do you know me? Wang Xiaoyao frowned tightly. He smelled the conspiracy more and more clearly, but he had no way to escape tonight. If the Wang family of Beihai has a disaster in the future, it's all because of tonight. The teenager, who had taken off all the disguises, said in a cold tone. His momentum suddenly soared. Just when everyone thought he was going to attack the cliff, his figure flashed away from the battlefield in an instant. His cold sneer came from the air. You don't deserve to kill me. Go back and wait for our revenge. Wang Xiaoyao's expression suddenly changed. He subconsciously wanted to intercept him, but the teenager's figure had flashed continuously. In the blink of an eye, he had reached the seaside. He couldn't catch up with this kind of speed at all. If he escapes tonight, Wang Xiaoyao's heart suddenly sank. At the bottom of the cliff, a ferocious roar suddenly rang out. Saint didn't hesitate and went straight to the teenager who had reached the seaside. The teenager sneered. His feet landed on the sea and he suddenly turned around. There was a sudden change when he was unprepared. The seawater under the teenager's feet suddenly exploded, and countless splashes surged. The teenager's fleeing figure hit the splashes, but his whole body didn't move forward. Instead, he instantly retreated dozens of meters. Bomb! The teenager was shocked and angry, but more confused. He couldn't tell whether the explosion was a bomb or not. If it was a bomb, how could the other party bury it here in advance? Was it a coincidence? Everything happened in the blink of an eye. But the distance of dozens of meters was enough for Saint to get close to him again. The teenager's indifferent face suddenly changed. He opened his mouth and roared, "This is..." Boom! The huge roar of sword energy suddenly smashed down, drowning out all the teenager's voice. Saint raised his arms high, and the sword energy all over his body condensed crazily. A giant sword with a length of hundreds of meters appeared above his head. Saint clenched his hands and suddenly chopped down. The sword energy that almost split heaven and earth roared wildly and smashed down. A trace of ferocity flashed in the teenager's eyes, and he subconsciously dodged to the right. Boom! The giant sword fell on the sea, and hundreds of meters of seawater were split open. The huge impact made the teenager's body suddenly lose balance, and he directly spat out a mouthful of blood. No one could see what happened at that moment, and no one knew why the teenager's figure, which could have gone far, retreated. But it didn't matter at all. Wang Xiaoyao's eyes were indifferent. As soon as Saint caught up with the teenager, he had already left the cliff and rushed to the seaside at full speed. Saint's figure was close to the teenager in an instant. He didn't have a sword in his hand, but there were hundreds and thousands of blue sword shadows whistling around him. One after another, the long swords kept exploding, bringing with them a destructive power. The whole place shook violently in the fierce collisions. Wang Xiaoyao's figure quickly approached the seaside. If the teenager ran away, the entire Wang family of Beihai would provoke a big enemy in the future. The Wang family of Beihai was not afraid of trouble, but no one wanted to trouble themselves. So this time, he didn't hide his strength at all. In the roar of thunder and seawater, his body drove the electric lights straight into the battlefield. They were dozens of meters apart. Wang Xiaoyao opened his hands, and a giant sword dozens of meters long suddenly condensed in his hands. The giant sword was heavy and sharp, and with an almost unstoppable sharpness, it turned in Wang Xiaoyao's hands. Wang Xiaoyao held his palm and swept the sword. The endless seawater suddenly exploded, and the giant sword, like opening the sky, swept with abundant and irresistible sword intent. Infinite killing intent suddenly broke out on the sea. 6 paths of reincarnation, Sword of King path. There was finally a trace of undisguised eagerness in the teenager's indifferent eyes, and he suddenly said, "I am..." Boom! Thousands of long swords sprang out of the water again, and the roar was completely intended to cover up the teenager's words. Countless long swords condensed from seawater flashed with thunder and rushed to the teenager's back. Saint was silent, and he made up his mind not to let the teenager say a word. "You!" The teenager's eyes suddenly stood up. Saint's sword energy and Wang Xiaoyao's sword intent almost shrouded him at the same time. The teenager seemed to know that he couldn't be kind today, and he went completely crazy. Thunder and lightning were blooming all over his body. In the face of the siege of Saint and Wang Xiaoyao, he didn't retreat at all, but chose to fight desperately. "All of you go to hell." The teenager roared with all his strength, and the handprint of his hands changed again. In the thunder and lightning, a large area of seawater suddenly surged and shook. The waves turned over, and countless seawater instantly rose. Seal. In the roar that seemed to destroy the world, countless seawater violently rushed to the sky. For a moment, the world was turning over. The sea turned into a mountain and the sky. The originally calm sea instantly set off a huge wave as high as 100 feet. The huge waves kept rising and almost covered the sky. In the almost suffocating scene, the huge waves surged down with irresistible force. The teenager's expression was cold. At this moment, his every move had a kind of dazzling style, and the momentum was so strong that it could almost split the sky. The huge waves were like landslides. Wang Xiaoyao's giant sword and Saint's thunder and lightning were instantly submerged by the huge waves. Their bodies went up against the current in the huge waves, shaking constantly. The huge waves suppressed the thunder and the giant sword and fell on the coast. The whole coastline seemed to be shaking, and the place where the huge waves hit directly left a deep pit with a length of hundreds of meters. The teenager, who had been completely crazy, did not stop and made another handprint. Above the sea, his body suddenly shot straight into the sky. Star River Seal. Instantly, all the glimmers in the heavens and the earth seemed to have converged onto the young man. The young man was like a young god that had descended to the mortal world, and his entire body was covered in a cold and lethal light that seemed like a boundless and boundless river of stars. Saint and Wang Xiaoyao raised their hands instinctively. High in the sky, the teenager, whose every move seemed to be able to destroy the world, suddenly swooped down with endless light. Pseudo-domain. Wang Xiaoyao suddenly let out a scream. The teenager's swooping body was close to Saint and Wang Xiaoyao, with the whole galaxy and the whole sky. The figures of Saint and Wang Xiaoyao fell into the deep sea with the teenager in an instant. The monstrous thunder and lightning continued to spread on the sea, and the dark blue kept rising and spreading on the sea. The whole sea began to spin wildly with the teenager as the center. Attack first. Still attack first. The teenager, who had made up his mind, had a great courage to ignore life and death. The moment the three fell into the sea, a new handprint was formed again. Samsara Seal. The dark blue sea suddenly turned into a huge whirlpool that could swallow everything. Saint and Wang Xiaoyao, who had no time to adjust, were constantly spinning with the whirlpool, and their bodies were almost completely out of balance. This was not a pseudo-domain, but it could make the body lose control. Wasn't it a pseudo-domain in another sense? Endless thunder and lightning continued to condense in the whirlpool, and one after another kept hitting Wang Xiaoyao. Wang Xiaoyao's body shook violently, and his strong aura instantly weakened. Saint suddenly snorted coldly. In the fiercely spinning whirlpool, a blazing fire instantly burned on the sea. The thick whirlpool evaporated rapidly, and even a large amount of thunder and lightning began to be completely obliterated. The teenager let out a long roar. His body rose into the air again, and his hands made a handprint. Ling Shao Seal. The sea calmed down in the turbulence. There was no change in the sky. But the teenager's eyes were blood-red. As the handprint was completed, his aura instantly soared. The peak of the thunder-shocking realm. Saint and Wang Xiaoyao were startled. How similar was this handprint to the unique skill of the Wang family of Beihai, against the way of heaven? The teenager finished the handprint, but he did not stop. His face was frighteningly pale, but his movements became more and more determined, with inviolable pride and coldness. The ninth handprint. Divine Punishment Handprint. The light around the teenager suddenly expanded and instantly spread into a halo with a range of hundreds of meters. The handprint was completed. In the roar of thunder, countless thunder and lightning suddenly appeared in the air. 10, 100, 1,000, within a radius of hundreds of meters, the area covered by the halo instantly became a hell of thunder and lightning. Saint resisted with all his strength, but he was shocked to find that all the thunder and lightning, fire, and even ice within the scope of the halo were all sucked out. All he could rely on was the sword, and only the sword energy. The dense thunder and lightning kept falling from the sky, like the wrath of heaven. Wang Xiaoyao could hardly hold on and coughed up blood. He held on, subconsciously glanced at Saint, and smiled bitterly. Although Saint did his best, he did not use all his unique skills. His so-called full strength was just the power of his realm. But from beginning to end, Saint's sword only had sword energy, not sword intent. It was self-evident what this meant. Among the 12 supermasters of Samsara, the other supermasters might be mysterious, but there were traces to follow. Only Military Counselor and Saint had no information to search for. The two of them seemed to have appeared out of thin air. It could only be said that the two most mysterious heavenly kings had hidden themselves very well, so well that no one knew who they really were. Sword intent was the easiest clue to guess a person's real origin. But Saint did not use the slightest sword intent from beginning to end. In other words, he did not use any unique skills. If not, he would not be so passive. At this time, did he still want to hide his identity? Wang Xiaoyao vomited blood, and his consciousness gradually faded. The thunder and lightning in the sky finally fell. In the night, the young man's cold and arrogant voice sounded again, with extreme killing intent and undisguised weakness. "I'll send you on your way." His hands formed seals again. This time, the seals were obviously much faster than before, but it was also much longer. One by one, the seals were completed quickly. The youth's extremely powerful aura instantly became extremely weak, but the seals were still continuing. Wang Xiaoyao suddenly thought of Qin Weibai's words. His lips moved and he struggled to say, "Comprehensive style?" Boom. The world seemed to shake suddenly. The young man's gestures had been completed, and endless light gushed out of his body. It was dazzling enough to cover up everything, and sharp enough to stir the whole world. Behind the immortality seal, it turned out to be the edge of the sword. There was no thunder, fire, or ice in the light. There was only wind. It was gentle and soft. It was illusory. The wind that destroyed everything. Comprehensive style, emptiness and infinity. The world was empty, but the deadly danger was endless. Saint suddenly widened his eyes as if he couldn't believe it. But he immediately reacted, gave a long roar and jumped up. His body sank into the light and disappeared completely. No one could see everything clearly. They only felt that the world was surging, and the light completely covered all the pictures. In the young man's unwilling and desperate roar, the dangerous light and sharp edge instantly expanded and burst. The sword intent, which was so complicated that it was extremely difficult to identify, surged and scattered. In the light, the figures of Saint and the young man fell from the sky at the same time. The young man's mouth was full of blood, and there seemed to be some minced flesh of his tongue. In the last sword, Saint was slightly better, but he deliberately crushed the young man's tongue. In the end, it was a lose-lose situation. From beginning to end, Saint didn't let the young man say anything. They didn't even know his name. The young man's body fell to the ground, and his breath was weak, but he looked unusually calm. The battlefield was completely quiet. The sound of light footsteps came through the night. No one knew when Qin Weibai had walked down the cliff and came to the front of the young man. She looked at his eyes calmly. When the young man saw Qin Weibai, his calm face suddenly became excited. He stared at her and struggled to move to Qin Weibai. Although he couldn't speak, everyone could feel the unwillingness and questioning in his eyes. But Qin Weibai's eyes were more complicated. "Do you want to know why I killed you?" Qin Weibai looked at the young man and suddenly asked softly. The young man's struggling body stopped, and he just stared at Qin Weibai's dreamy and perfect face, panting heavily. Because some people seem to have no weakness, but their biggest weakness is responsibility. And so is he. Qin Weibai said calmly, "And I happen to have the least sense of responsibility." The young man's eyes narrowed and he seemed to be relieved, but then his eyes became cold and mocking. Qin Weibai's eyes gradually became cold, with some inexplicable hatred. The young man's eyes seemed to irritate her. She said coldly, "I know you are not convinced, but I won't give you a chance. Your road to the heavenly sun ends here." The fear in the young man's eyes flashed away. He clenched his teeth and closed his eyes. Qin Weibai turned her head and glanced at Wang Xiaoyao, who was weak but still awake. "Kill him," she whispered. Wang Xiaoyao hesitated, but he still walked over. "I want to see it with my own eyes." Qin Weibai's tone was as light as the wind, but it was mixed with the ice and snow of deep winter. "I want to see you kill him with my own eyes and burn his bones to ashes." Burn his bones to ashes. How deep was his obsession? Wang Xiaoyao's body trembled slightly, and a long sword condensed from lightning took shape in his hand. He hesitated, but finally raised his hand and stabbed the young man's throat with it. The young man's vitality quickly disappeared. Under the lightning, he finally turned into a pile of ashes. The heavenly sun died. Qin Weibai turned and left calmly. The young heavenly sun was born without a name and died without a name. Chapter 205. No matter how the general trend of the dark world changed, for ordinary people, this world seemed to be a pure land forever. The light and harmony covered all the dark killings. Under the rain and snow, outside the dark world, there were countless joys and sorrows. In the secular world, everyone was living for themselves and pursuing what they were interested in. In the bustling atmosphere of Zhongzhou State, the word fairyland suddenly became popular on the internet. At first, only some people were discussing it, but as time went by, more and more words about fairyland began to appear in major forums and news. For a time, it became popular all over Zhongzhou State, and it seemed that all the people were exploring it. Zhongzhou State had freedom of speech, and the news industry was extremely developed. Although the government learned the news in the first place and controlled the relevant public opinion after receiving the order, some news and pictures were quickly deleted. The enthusiasm of netizens did not diminish at all. Descriptions and pictures about fairyland popped up from time to time. Although they were quickly deleted, more and more people saved the pictures and then tried to understand the relevant inside story. The government kept blocking the news, but there were more and more descriptions about fairyland. Today, it had formed an almost irrepressible wave. Because this so-called fairyland was not a flash, but a real existence. Fairyland was a mountain, or to be exact, a part of a mountain, located on the shore of West Lake in Lin. Inside Lonely Mountain, Mount Qingyun. As one of the magnificent sights of West Lake, Lonely Mountain was visited by tourists every day, and the legend of the so-called fairyland arose. At this time, it was midsummer, and the temperature in Lin was extremely hot. However, the Lonely Mountain by the West Lake was incredibly cool, especially in the northwest of the Lonely Mountain. Around the magnificent Lonely Peak, which occupied about 3/10 of the entire area of the Lonely Mountain, there was a cold mist rising in the midsummer. It was a vast expanse of whiteness, almost covering the entire mountain. When the cold mist first rose, no one noticed it. But as time went by, the cold mist here became thicker and more obvious, which finally aroused the curiosity of others. When the first tourist walked up Lonely Mountain and entered the cold mist of Mount Qingyun, everything he saw turned into shock. Flowers were blooming all over Mount Qingyun. In the middle of summer July, in this unbelievably cool environment, flowers like wintersweet and daffodils that should never bloom in summer actually bloomed. Some plants that did not belong to summer were also in full bloom. The entire Qingyun Hill was surging with clouds and mist. The grass and trees were fresh, in a blur of indistinct ignorance, as if straight into a fairyland. The cold fog on Mount Qingyun did not dissipate, but became thicker and thicker. When more and more tourists entered Mount Qingyun and discovered that the cold fog could even isolate sound, it finally caused a great commotion and curiosity. The cold mist spread but did not leave Mount Qingyun. The white mist was dense. It was as if one person was standing in the white fog while the other was outside. Even if they were less than a meter apart, they would not be able to transmit any sound. This was simply a supernatural phenomenon. It was inconceivable and incomprehensible. The fairyland became famous in Zhongzhou State. When the public opinion was completely out of control, the government finally made a strong response. Lonely Mountain closed the mountain on the grounds of internal reorganization. Even a large area of water near Lonely Mountain had been completely blocked, and a sign saying no visitors were allowed. Ordinary people might not know what Mount Qingyun was, but every high-level official in Zhongzhou State knew it very well. Mount Qingyun and Qingyun Temple were the secluded places of Great Master Wei, a metaphysics grandmaster in Zhongzhou State. Although the cold fog in summer could not be explained for the time being, when Great Master Wei came out, there would always be an explanation. But time passed from May to June, and then to July. August was approaching. Not to mention Great Master Wei, even his 2 disciples in Qingyun Temple had not given any explanation. Qingyun Temple remained silent. Only the vast white fog kept spreading, enveloping the temple with the most fate in all of Lin, and the whole Jiangxi province, and even the whole south of Zhongzhou state. The white fog never left Mount Qingyun, but kept circling and spreading toward the very high sky. In a few months, the cold fog kept rising, and now it almost covered the whole sky. From a distance, the white fog rising from below was like a heavenly pillar, running through heaven and earth, connecting the top and the bottom. There seemed to be an extremely vast and awe-inspiring power in the dark. Mount Qingyun had completely disappeared in the white fog, and no one could see the scene in it anymore. The darkest time before dawn had passed, and the sky began to shimmer. The blue water of West Lake stirred gently in the morning light, spreading to the distance with faint ripples. In a quiet world, a lone boat passed through the plainclothes and armed police stationed near the water area as if there was no one else around, and approached the blocked Lonely Mountain at a steady pace. Lonely Mountain was looming in the dim environment, and only the cold fog in the northwest was still clear, connecting heaven and earth and covering everything inside. Faith leakage. On the lone boat, a thin but tall figure was riding alone on the boat, moving slowly on the water surface. He wore a neat Taoist robe and a Taoist crown. He held a horsetail whisk in his hand, looking formal and solemn. In the somewhat dark environment, he looked at the area where the cold mist was rising with a solemn expression. His wise and clear eyes seemed to be able to see through everything with an indescribable brilliance. In the end, you still couldn't hold on. Xian Xuanzi, an eccentric of Taoism in Zhongzhou state. Now he was a metaphysics grandmaster who was as famous as Great Master Wei. Only Xian Xuanzi was qualified to visit Great Master Wu's place of seclusion to understand the situation. The water rippled slightly. The lone boat approached the shore. Xian Xuanzi, who looked like a sage and was dressed very formally, slowly landed on the shore. The armed police stationed on the shore looked confused and took 2 steps forward subconsciously. Before he spoke, Xian Xuanzi had already handed over a certificate with a peaceful smile. The armed police took the certificate and glanced at it. He stood up straight and gave a military salute reflexively. Xian Xuanzi took the certificate back with a smile. Looking at the cold fog close at hand, his eyes became more and more solemn. He carefully tidied up his Taoist robe and wiped off the dust and water stains on his body. Then he took a deep breath and walked into the cold fog in front of him with the horsetail whisk in his hand. The white fog was so dense that it seemed to be a mass of air that could not be dispelled. But strangely, in the white fog, the visibility was not as low as imagined. In the surging fog, one could clearly see the blooming flowers under their feet, one after another. The petals were stained with moisture, gently swaying in the morning breeze and shining with an almost enchanting luster. Walking along the fog, the former stone path was almost completely covered by plants and flowers that had grown in recent months. The road ahead had completely disappeared, and everywhere in sight was full of vitality. But as the white mist drifted away, there was a clear sense of desolation. Xian Xuanzi's face was expressionless. He stepped softly among the flowers and went all the way up to Qingyun Temple. The cold fog in the mountain seemed to be getting thicker. The fog drifted slower and slower, as if it had been stagnant in the air. Xian Xuanzi frowned and slightly quickened his pace. The road under his feet went straight up. A faint light lit up in front of him. The faint yellow light drifted so fast that it was almost illusory, as if it was guiding the way forward. In the fog, an abundant and loud voice sounded in front of him, with a peaceful and tranquil smile. "Excuse me for not going out to greet you, honorable guest. It's dark and the road is slippery. Be careful of your steps." "Master, you're welcome." Xian Xuanzi paused and continued to go up. "In Mount Qingyun, there is no day and night. All I see is luck." He stepped on the plant-covered steps with a calm look, but the horsetail whisk in his hand shook slightly. In an instant, the cold fog in front of Xian Xuanzi surged wildly, and the fog twisted and retreated in front of him. In just a few seconds, the fog in front of Xian Xuanzi had all drifted to the left and right sides. In front of him, Mount Qingyun, which had been shrouded in cold fog for months, became clearer than ever. Dozens of meters away, the inconspicuous gate of Qingyun Temple appeared in his sight. Two middle-aged monks in monk robes stood in front of the gate, supporting an old man with disheveled hair. Xian Xuanzi's somewhat complicated eyes gradually turned cold. He stood there for a while, then slowly moved forward. The distance of dozens of meters was getting closer. The three people in front of the temple gate remained motionless. "Master, how have you been?" The white fog retreated to the left and right. Facing the pure and fresh air, Xian Xuanzi slowly came to the gate of the temple and asked with a smile. The two middle-aged monks lowered their heads and remained silent. Great Master Wei, who looked like an eminent monk a few months ago, now had disheveled hair. His gray hair had lost its luster, and his long hair had reached his shoulders. He was dressed in ordinary clothes and no longer had the air of an eminent monk. Hearing Xian Xuanzi's sarcastic greeting, Great Master Wei still looked peaceful. He smiled calmly, pointed to the white mist in front of him, and then pointed to his long gray hair, and said in a gentle voice, "I'm barely good enough. How are you?" "I'm fine." Xian Xuanzi nodded. He seemed to sigh with emotion, but the coldness in his eyes became more and more obvious. "Master, you lost after all." "I will win." Great Master Wei smiled. His voice was still loud and firm, but the luster in his eyes was dim and weak. "If you didn't face the tribulation and bear the karma for the demoness, you would have a chance. But now, how can you win?" Xian Xuanzi looked at the living Buddha in front of him, who was like a myth in the hearts of the higher-ups of Zhongzhou State. His expression was confused, disappointed, and puzzled. He reached out and pointed to the white hair on the living Buddha's head. He said quietly, "With ease." "Demoness?" Great Master Wuwei's mood did not fluctuate at all. The luster in his eyes, which could see through all karma in the past, dimmed, leaving only a smile, sincerity, compassion, and tranquility, just like the West Lake under Mount Qingyun. "She doesn't belong to the mortal world, and she's not a demoness. Is she a divine?" Xian Xuanzi's tone became colder and colder. "She's my tribulation." Great Master Wei shook his head slowly. "With our abilities, even if it's a tribulation, so what? We can always avoid it." Xian Xuanzi's tone was proud, but the puzzlement and doubt in it became more obvious. "Isn't it karma to avoid it?" Great Master Wei asked in reply. He looked at Xian Xuanzi with faint eyes. The smile in his pupils gradually disappeared, and his eyes became quiet and deep. Xian Xuanzi was silent. After a long time, he said faintly, "I don't agree with you." This was a conflict of metaphysics cognition and a divergence of ideas. Great Master Wei obviously did not intend to persuade Xian Xuanzi. He just smiled gently and said, "Our differences have always existed, but in a few years, everything will be clear." "There's no time." Xian Xuanzi suddenly spoke. He turned around and looked at the white cold mist in Mount Qingyun. "This is your fate, the fate of Qingyun Temple. Now it's leaking. In a few years? Can you still hold on? Even if you can, the higher-ups won't be patient. Now the situation is delicate. They can't wait for a few months, let alone a few years." Great Master Wuwei's eyes narrowed slightly. He looked at the expressionless Xian Xuanzi seriously, and after a long silence, he said faintly, "So, you chose them in the end?" "They chose me." Xian Xuanzi turned to look at Great Master Wuwei and said calmly, "Don't you understand?" "I don't." Great Master Wuwei smiled and shook his head. There was stubbornness and persistence in his calm expression. "The one at the top won't agree, will he? That's the general trend. He can only go with the flow." Xian Xuanzi shook his head. "The general trend will change." Great Master Wei was still smiling, very indifferent and fearless. "How can the general trend change?" Xian Xuanzi subconsciously raised his voice, and his tone became a little aggressive. "What's the general trend?" Great Master Wei asked calmly. Xian Xuanzi looked at Great Master Wei thoughtfully. His patience seemed to be gradually disappearing, and his tone began to become cold. "East Island? Are you talking about Li Tianlan?" He was no longer a variable, just a pawn. He was going against heaven and the general trend. Even if he was the chosen one, so what? When he died, Great Master, you are too stubborn. So when you met him for the first time, you wanted to lead him to Wuyue province in the future? In that case, you have already made a choice, haven't you? Great Master Wei sighed. Xian Xuanzi suddenly froze, expressionless, and said no more. I will win. After a moment of silence, Great Master Wei whispered again, why not go against heaven? The world thinks that we are the most sober because we see through everything, but it is because we see through everything that we are the most muddle-headed. I don't want to go on. Even if I go against heaven's secrets once, so what? Besides, are heaven's secrets, luck, and fate really doomed to be unchangeable? You know this better than I do. Xian Xuanzi's face seemed to be a little livid. He fiercely shook the horsetail whisk in his hand and said coldly, ridiculous. Ignorant. Great Master Wei shook his head and stopped talking. Maybe you're right. But the demonists messed up your plan, and you can't hold on anymore. They chose me. So, if you don't want to commit treason, please cooperate with me. Xian Xuanzi looked at the white mist condensed by fate in the distance. After a while, he slowly said, I will give up Qingyun Temple. Great Master Wu Wei's tone was calm. But it can only be Qingyun Temple. I'm responsible for Zhongzhou State. A trace of anger flashed in Xian Xuanzi's eyes. He snorted, ignored the three people in front of the door, and strode into the temple. Great Master Wu Wei still didn't move. His eyes seemed to look through the cold mist in front of him, quietly appreciating the ripples on the surface of the West Lake. Master. The first disciple, Ruzhen, hesitated for a long time and finally couldn't help asking, Master, what are you talking about with Xian Xuanzi? About winning or losing? Great Master Wu Wei smiled and looked at his first disciple. What do you want to say? We are monks. Ruzhen's lips moved. He looked at his master's eyes, and his voice finally fell silent. Yes, we are monks. It doesn't matter whether we win or lose. But in this era, how can monks let go of all the fetters? After all, monks are still Zhongzhou State people. Xian Xuanzi sighed deeply, and for the first time, there was a touch of worry in his eyes. He was silent. After a full 5 minutes, he continued to say, Xian Xuanzi and I are not fighting for winning or losing, but for the fate of the country. To be exact, it's the dragon vein of Zhongzhou State. Dragon vein? Ruzhen trembled all over and suddenly raised his head, his face full of astonishment. Zhongzhou State? Hey, the dragon vein of Zhongzhou State has been lost. Great Master Wei laughed at himself. A few simple words, but the news contained was earth-shattering. Ruzhen was so shocked by this short sentence that he felt dizzy. The dragon vein of Zhongzhou State had been lost? How was that possible? The dragon vein was related to the fate of a country. It could be said that it was the fate of a country. Maybe many people didn't believe in fate, but on the contrary, many people believed in luck. This alone could explain the reality of fate, but it was difficult for ordinary people to guide it. The fate of a person and the fate of a country did not change much in terms of quality, mainly in terms of quantity. Therefore, most of the fate of a country needed to be carried by the dragon vein, and the dragon vein of Zhongzhou State had been in Kunlun Mountain for hundreds of years. But now his master said that the dragon vein of Zhongzhou State had been lost? The dragon vein is lost? Ruzhen was stunned for a long time before he asked with a stutter. Part of it is lost, and part of it is scattered. There are still some remnants in Kunlun City. Great Master Wei said softly, Xian Xuanzi and I have been trying to reunite the dragon vein and restore the fate of the country over the years, but now, Xian Xuanzi has a choice, and so have they. But his path is wrong. Who they were was obvious without asking. It was related to the fate of the country. It was impossible for the high-level officials of Zhongzhou State not to pay attention to this. At present, did they choose Xian Xuanzi? Why was this path wrong? But the dragon vein, how could it disappear? How is this possible? Ruzhen rubbed his bald head with a confused look. 20 years ago, Li Kuangtu betrayed the country. After that war, the dragon vein was scattered. If Kunlun City really occupied the dragon vein, how could they be in this state now? Great Master Wu Wei snorted coldly. But Ruzhen still didn't understand. He asked cautiously, Master, do you mean that Xian Xuanzi's path may not be able to reunite the dragon vein in the end? He can. Great Master Wu Wei sighed weakly. At this moment, he seemed to have suddenly aged a lot, and his whole person was gloomy. If he can't, they won't choose him. Xian Xuanzi came here today to occupy the fate here, combine it with his fate, and reunite the dragon vein in the shortest time. It's just that our directions are different. The dragon vein I condense is prosperous, but his choice is obviously more to the taste of some people. What's his choice? Ruzhen asked subconsciously. Great Master Wu Wei turned and walked into the temple, saying coldly, weapons. After entering the temple gate, he passed through the Supermaster Hall and entered the Mahavira Hall. There was no chanting in the small Qingyun temple, which seemed empty and quiet. Great Master Wu Wei, who was a little unsteady, walked silently into the main hall. Without looking at Xian Xuanzi, who stood quietly in front of him, he knelt in front of the Buddha statue and chanted silently. Xian Xuanzi didn't look at him either. All his attention was focused on the two objects in front of him. In front of him were two discs about 20 centimeters in diameter, like a small wall clock, but there was only one pointer in the center of the disc. There were no numbers on the edge of the disc, only 4 traditional Chinese characters were engraved on it. The ups and downs of life and death. There were some patterns engraved in the center of the discs. One of the discs was engraved with something that looked like a metal tube and was painted silver. The other disc was engraved with a cloud of smoke. At this moment, the pointers in the two discs were constantly trembling. On the disc engraved with silver metal and copper, the slender pointer trembled and stopped in the center of the life gate, while on the disc engraved with cloud, the pointer stopped at the edge of the death gate. Destiny roulette? Xian Xuanzi stared at the two discs for a long time, then sneered and said, Great Master, is it meaningful? You should know that it's the most useless thing. Many people who know the destiny roulette regard it as a treasure, but in fact, it's useless. The roulette can't control people's fate. On the contrary, it's completely controlled by people. So what? Great Master Wu Wei asked, kneeling on the rush cushion. Xian Xuanzi took a deep breath and stared at the disc engraved with the silver metal tube. After a long while, he said in a low voice, When I saw Li Tianlan for the first time, I noticed that his fate was extremely strong, even rare for hundreds of years. But his fate was accumulated by the death qi, so he was destined not to live long. Great Master, you want to use the Li family to reassemble the dragon vein. This is really a wrong way. Great Master Wu Wei was silent. Xian Xuanzi said in a low voice, How can Li Tianlan live? Even if you change his birth destiny, or even let it return to chaos, how can he live? He will die, sooner or later. Xian Xuanzi paused and said inexplicably, The more glorious it was, the more chaotic it was. Great Master Wu Wei nodded to show his approval. He smiled and said, So the general trend needs to be restarted, and the invincible realm is nothing. Nothing? Xian Xuanzi's tone was cold. Li Tianlan? Can he do it? He can do it. Only he can do it. One day, he alone will be enough to recreate the most glorious era. Great Master Wu Wei's tone grew calmer. He will die. Xian Xuanzi shook his head. If he is alone, he will die. But Qin Weibai is with him, and their fates are completely complementary. In terms of fate, they can be said to be a match made in heaven. With her, who dares to say that Li Tianlan will die? Great Master Wu Wei still denied Xian Xuanzi's remarks. Xian Xuanzi snorted heavily, seemed to have gritted his teeth, and said coldly, The demon woman will bring chaos to the world. Buzz. As soon as his voice fell, the two discs in front of him suddenly made a soft sound. On the destiny roulette, the two pointers that had been trembling but never moved began to move in an instant. The pointer of the roulette engraved with a silver metal cylinder trembled slightly, and almost instantly turned from the gate of life to the center of the gate of death. The pointer stayed firmly in the middle of the gate of death, motionless. The pointer of the roulette engraved with clouds and smoke was also moving, from the edge of the gate of death to the gate of life. Xian Xuanzi froze for a moment, then chuckled and said, Great Master, you're still wrong. He picked up one of the discs and said with a smile, Li Tianlan's destiny points straight to the gate of death. There is no way he can survive. What else do you have to say? The death of the heavenly son is imperceptibly related to him. But things go in the opposite direction when they reach an extreme, which is not necessarily a bad thing. Great Master Wu said calmly, I still believe in those two children. Li Tianlan has fate and is the most suitable carrier. Little Bai can complement him. This is the most perfect yin and yang alternation. Fate carrier, yin and yang alternation. Xian Xuanzi's body shook violently, and his ruddy face seemed to turn pale for a moment. The horsetail whisk in his hand trembled violently. Staring at Great Master Wu's calm profile, Xian Xuanzi said incredulously, Do you want him to carry the dragon vein? The dragon vein carried the fate of a country. If Li Tianlan carried the dragon vein, this was really against the will of heaven. Are you crazy? Great Master Wu smiled without saying anything. Xian Xuanzi's face was cloudy. After a while, he said coldly, Is this the reason why you chose them? Choice? Great Master Wu shook his head. If it's a choice, it's the destiny that chose me. He closed his eyes and his thoughts surged. More than a decade ago, in the winter of that year in the southwest of Zhongzhou State, when he first saw Qin Weibai, who was only 10 years old, it was in a heavy snow that was rarely seen in the southwest for many years. On that day, in the snowy and turbid world, all he saw was a desolate soul covered with scars and a dead heart. A smile appeared on the corner of Great Master Wu's mouth. This was the destiny. A slight sound of breaking through the air suddenly sounded. Great Master Wu was motionless. In the dull sound, the soft horsetail whisk instantly became as straight as a sword. Xian Xuanzi held the horsetail whisk and stabbed it directly into Great Master Wu's heart. Blood spread. Great Master Wu opened his eyes, and his eyes were still calm. I got the fate of Qingyun Temple and regathered the dragon vein. Even if you have the destiny, what can you do? Xian Xuanzi said in an indifferent tone. Great Master Wu chuckled and put his palms together. He sighed and said, When things reach an extreme, they will move in the opposite direction. With his voice, Great Master Wu's long white hair, which reached his shoulders, instantly burned to ashes. A circle of invisible air waves spread around him. At this moment, Great Master Wu seemed to be glowing. He straightened his body. Boom! There seemed to be a roar between heaven and earth. The airwaves expanded in an instant, carrying Xian Xuanzi's body and directly throwing him out of the hall. Great Master Wu, whose long hair was gone, had blood flowing from his chest and dyed his clothes red. Kneeling in front of the Buddha statue, he piously bowed his head and put his palms together. His voice was still loud and full of energy. Amitabha! Pale-faced, Xian Xuanzi was thrown out of the hall. Holding the horsetail whisk tightly in his hand, his face was full of disbelief. A ray of dazzling light leaped out of the sky. The sky and the earth were covered with sunshine in an instant. When the morning light rose, night was approaching. Where there was morning, there was night. Chapter 206. It was cloudy at dawn. The morning sun was like fire. The blazing red sun leaped out of the eastern sea, and the darkness before sunrise began to fade. Endless light surged in the gathering clouds, and light and darkness intertwined. As the sun rose, all the clouds in the sky were illuminated into a gorgeous picture of light and darkness. The light pierced through the clouds and went through the sky. The gloomy darkness disappeared bit by bit, and the bright light fell from the sky, shining on the distant sea, the green trees and flowers in Changdao, and the tall buildings in the city. Everything seemed to happen in an instant, but it seemed to be a long time ago. It was another sunny day. Facing the sunshine of the third day, Li Tianlan slowly stepped on the grass under his feet, his mind calm and peaceful. The final battle was getting closer and closer. Since the end of the meeting on the first day, Li Tianlan seemed to have completely let go of everything. He didn't meditate or study the unique skills of martial arts. He quickly adjusted his state of mind and became empty and pure. In just one day, he seemed to have adjusted himself to the best state. The morning wind floated in the air, with the fragrance of grass and trees. Li Tianlan walked unhurriedly up a hillside covered with turf. This could be said to be one of the highest places in the whole club. Looking down from the top of the hill, most of the area in the club could be seen. The lake in the distance rippled gently, the flowers swayed, and the leisure area was full of people. This club, which had been closed for business, could be said to be the busiest time since its establishment. Cars drove in and out one after another. The whole club seemed to be operating something in an orderly and secret way. Li Tianlan looked at it quietly, with an inexplicable smile at the corner of his mouth. Today, Li Tianlan's realm had steadily stopped at the stabilization phase of the ice-condensing realm. Under the stimulation of the surge potion, the realm he showed was the stabilization phase of the fire-flaming realm. As for the actual combat strength, even Li Tianlan himself couldn't predict it if he didn't fight with all his strength. In the case that his realm and unique skills had temporarily reached the bottleneck, it was meaningless to meditate and study the unique skills. At least it couldn't play a better role in the upcoming final battle, but it would add more psychological burden to him. Li Tianlan didn't know when the final battle would break out, but he had decided to relax his mind and adjust himself to the strongest state before the final battle broke out. Although his realm was not high, his inheritance, physique, talent, and willpower combined together made him a combat capability that no one could ignore. At the critical moment of the final battle, anyone above the thunder-shocking realm had to exert the strength he should have. How are our preparations? Li Tianlan stood at the top of the mountain and looked down. He suddenly asked in a soft and calm tone. The last batch of weapons will be in place within 12 hours, through a special channel of the Samsara Palace. Behind him, Deep Dream answered seriously. When the super masters of Samsara Palace had left the club, Sai City directly gave Li Tianlan the most direct protection. Most of the time, at least one of Deep Dream or Sunset Shadow would appear within 20 meters of Li Tianlan at any time, and the two of them appeared at the same time even more often. Deep Dream and Sunset Shadow. In recent years, they were the two most active assassins of Sai City in the outside world. Although they were not masters of the half-step invincible realm, for assassins, in many cases, the level of their realm was not the most important factor. Now they were not at the top of the killer list, but with their close protection, Li Tianlan's safety could still be guaranteed. The Samsara Palace. Li Tianlan's body stiffened. After a while, he nodded and muttered to himself, "Well, the Samsara Palace?" His eyes were still calm, but his heart trembled quietly. The kind of uncatchable and uncontrollable powerlessness and melancholy swept through his nerves in an instant. It was faint but so deep. He and Qin Weibai. He lost contact again. The phone was not connected, no one answered the video call, and no one responded to the message. Duke, Horsewoman, Flaming Fire, and several supermasters had completely disappeared. In a series of plans of Zhongzhou State, the whole Samsara Palace seemed to have faded out without a trace. Li Tianlan sighed softly, and his eyes were in a trance. In just a few days, Qin Weibai seemed to be deliberately erasing all traces of her invisibly. There was no disagreement or quarrel between the two. In the last video call, Qin Weibai was still as gentle as water. But in that almost obsessive attachment and gentleness, the two seemed to drift apart. Everything about the Samsara Palace began to leave him, and Sai City appeared beside him. Li Tianlan didn't know what Qin Weibai was thinking. But in that series of quiet actions, he felt not only cruelty but also determination. He shook his head, suppressed the chaos in his heart, and calmed himself down again. The extremely closed living environment from childhood to adulthood seemed to have imprisoned his heart. Whether in the primeval forest or in the prison in the desert, Li Tianlan had his own goals and knew what he should do. When he walked out of the Li family's camp and came to Huading, facing the general trend in the great world, Li Tianlan had been at a loss, uneasy, and even fearful and self-abased. Under such circumstances, he met Qin Weibai, Yu Donglai, Li Baidian, and Ning Qianxing. He had his own brothers, his own women, and saw the turbulence of the world. Imperceptibly, Li Tianlan's uneasiness when he first entered the world seemed to have completely calmed down. His path was right in front of him. But now, as the Samsara Palace stripped him away and Qin Weibai deliberately cut off contact with him, Li Tianlan knew that the peace he thought was actually just an illusion. The sense of integration with the outside world was even mostly brought to him by Qin Weibai. When Qin Weibai disappeared, his sense of estrangement from the whole world suddenly began to reappear, so obvious and clear. He was no longer uneasy, but he was at a loss. He had his own goals, but he didn't know what to do for a while. So he stopped meditating and gave up improving his strength for the time being. He was adjusting his state, and he also wanted to seriously think about what he should do next when his heart was at its quietest. He had to do something. I should do something. With his back to Deep Dream behind him, Li Tianlan suddenly said calmly, "What do you want to do, young master?" Deep Dream was silent for a few seconds and said slowly, "I'm willing to do it for you." Li Tianlan shook his head. "I'll do it, not you." He turned his head and looked at Deep Dream, whose enchanting face was full of doubts. He said with a smile, "It's different." Deep Dream blinked her bright eyes and didn't say anything. The current Li Tianlan was completely different from the Li Tianlan she first met. It could even be said that they were two different people. When she first met him, the young governor was calm, but behind that calmness, Deep Dream could clearly feel the seriousness and sharpness that came to her face. But now, he was still calm, but with a real sense of relaxation. He stood there casually, gentle, and all the sharpness had disappeared. He was as quiet as an abyss, as ethereal as fog, and as calm as ice. In this state, Li Tianlan's every move was with the most essential truth and gentleness. The truest was often the easiest to be ignored. All kinds of thoughts flashed through Deep Dream's mind. When she saw the smile gradually emerging in Li Tianlan's eyes, she was suddenly shocked. The eyes of the young governor opposite her, who could still be called a teenager, were as clear as water, but they seemed to have the power to see through the soul. They were soft and gentle, which made people panic. "I don't understand what you mean, young master." Deep Dream subconsciously avoided Li Tianlan's gaze and said, "How is my current identity in Zhongzhou state?" Li Tianlan said softly, as if he was asking Deep Dream or himself. He took out a cigarette and lit it. Looking at the black wooden box of cigarettes that belonged to the Wang family of Beihai, he was lost in thought. "It's expensive beyond words," Deep Dream said without hesitation. Li Tianlan's current identity might be controversial, but under the shadow of being the son of a trader, he also had the halo of the young governor of Sai City. In Zhongzhou state, Sai City was a well-deserved superpower. Sidu Tongyue, the governor of Sai City, was known as the hidden god of Zhongzhou state. She controlled Setting Sun, one of the 12 murderous weapons. Even if she couldn't compare with the Wang family of Beihai and Kunlun City, she was a real behemoth. Li Tianlan was now the young governor of Sai City and one of the 3 young heavenly sons of Zhongzhou state. He was absolutely important. It was no exaggeration to say that he was expensive beyond words. "Yes, but don't you think we're too deserted here?" Li Tianlan's tone was bland. Deep Dream raised her eyebrows. Before she could speak, Li Tianlan continued, "My background is sensitive, but since I'm still in East Island, it means that the higher-ups have a relatively clear attitude toward it. I had a close relationship with Samsara before, and the situation was not clear, so it was reasonable for many people to wait and see. But now it's different. After the meeting the day before yesterday, we divided the defense areas, and I became the young governor of Sai City. But these days, how many people have come to visit Sai City?" Deep Dream was lost in thought. In the meeting the day before yesterday, military counselor of Samsara Palace and god of army of Zhongzhou state successfully connected. After careful planning, they temporarily divided Changdao into 3 closely connected defense areas in order to better deal with the next decisive battle. The 3 defense areas were actually 3 routes of retreat. To win, they had to consider defeat first. On this point, military counselor and god of army were surprisingly consistent, and their planning was also very steady. Even if they lost the final battle, as long as one defense area was held, it would be a way out for the elites of Zhongzhou state. If they gathered together, the probability of being wiped out would be too high. Now the three defense areas were closely connected, and the three groups of people could quickly support each other when they were in different places. In this way, it was impossible for East Island to concentrate its greatest strength in one place to destroy the elites of Zhongzhou state first. After all, this was not a decisive battle between the two sides, but a multi-sided melee. In addition to Zhongzhou state, there was also a team of a big dark force. Although East Island had the home field advantage and the advantage in personnel, all the superpowers were eyeing them covetously, so it was destined that East Island would not dare to risk its life to attack a force. This final battle was a defense for East Island, but for all the forces outside East Island, it was an attack. This advance and retreat between attack and defense at the right time was enough to create a huge advantage. Sai City was in charge of the number 3 defense area, centered on the clubhouse under their feet, which was the closest to the edge of the battlefield. At the same time, Mount Shu was also divided into the No. 3 theater of operations with Sai City. The Wang family of Beihai was in charge of the number 2 defense area, and several supermasters of Samsara Palace would stay in the number 2 defense area under normal circumstances. But they did not belong to a specific area, and they provided full support. Kunlun City was in charge of the number 1 defense area, and the Eastern Theater of Operations was also planned inside the number 1 defense area. Of course, the forces participating in the Battle of Changdao were not these forces of Zhongzhou state. On the contrary, there were too many forces and agencies, so it was hard to discuss the most detailed plan in one meeting. The top management just divided the strongest or the largest number of forces into 3 defense areas. As for the other Secret Service agencies, they could freely choose their defense areas, and they would make adjustments after the final list of the 3 defense areas came out. Now one day after the meeting, there were forces that chose to join the number 3 defense area, but in contrast, there were too many people who chose to enter the number 2 defense area and the number 1 defense area. In Li Tianlan's view, this was not a normal phenomenon at all. In Zhongzhou state, Kunlun City and the Wang family of Beihai were indeed stronger than Sai City, but this was East Island. The final battle was coming, and it depended on the strength of the superpowers in East Island. In comparison, the strength of Sai City in East Island was no weaker than that of the other 2 defense areas. At least in terms of the top experts, Tribulation, known as the King of Shadow in the Dark World, was slightly stronger than Firmament in the number 2 defense area and Gu Zhendong in the number 1 defense area. In terms of strength and reputation, the only one who could compare with Tribulation was General of 9 Heavens, Gong Sun Chi, codenamed Azure Dragon. But Gong Sun Chi and his Terracotta Army were destined not to stay in one defense area. After all, they were the most aggressive special team. At least in Li Tianlan's view, if the forces invested by the superpowers in East Island were compared, even if Sai City was not stronger than the Wang family of Beihai, it was not weaker than the Wang family of Beihai, but it was stronger than Kunlun City. This was also something that made Li Tianlan confused. This time, Kunlun City strongly supported the national plan, and it could even be said to be the main promoter. Kunlun City set up the Snowdance Corps with Gu Qianchuan, an invincible realm expert, as the commander. He went to Northern Europe and invested a lot. But when it came to East Island, Kunlun City didn't invest much. Gu Zhendong, an invincible realm expert. Ice Crystal Frost Sword. Gu Yunxia. Plus Gu Hanshan. This seemed to be the main high-end force. The weirdest thing was that the higher-ups even acquiesced to this list with minimal investment. The reason for this was worth pondering. Li Tianlan didn't want to think too deeply. He only knew that when Kunlun City didn't invest as much in East Island as Sai City, there were many more people willing to join the number 1 defensive zone than the number 3 defensive zone, which was enough to explain the problem. This even showed that many people didn't approve of him, and they didn't approve of Sai City's willingness to accept him and even let him be the young governor. This might involve positions and grievances, but the most obvious thing was that they didn't think highly of Sai City. In the final analysis, It was just because he became the young governor of Sai City. Now, the halo over his head, or his own strength, seemed to be weaker than the other two young heavenly sons. So Li Tianlan had to do something. At least in this final battle, he had to make enough convincing results. For Li Tianlan, this was crucial for his development after returning to Zhongzhou State. If I go to fight with Wang Xingshao now and I can beat him, I guess there will be a lot more people willing to join the number 3 defensive zone. Li Tianlan was silent for a while and then said with a smile. Deep Dream was a little surprised. Although Wang Xingshao of the Wang family of Beihai was also called one of the 3 young heavenly sons of Zhongzhou State, in more people's hearts, he had become the leading figure of the young generation in Zhongzhou State. He was a thunder-shocking realm heavenly son with wind and thunder veins and top-notch inheritance. Even Deep Dream felt pressured by such a figure. After all, the young governor was a few years younger. Can you win? Deep Dream bit her red lip and asked softly. It's not a life-and-death battle. It's just a simple competition. Li Tianlan shook his head and was very frank. Why are you in such a hurry? The future of Zhongzhou State is destined to be your world. When you return to Zhongzhou State, there will be plenty of opportunities to compete. I don't think Xingshao will refuse. A loud laugh suddenly rang out at the foot of the mountain, bold and unrestrained. Li Tianlan raised his eyebrows and looked down. In his sight, a strong man was walking to the hillside and looking at him with a smile. The man was handsome and about 40 years old. He was full of masculinity from head to toe, looking overbearing and strong. He was dressed in plain clothes, but he walked with a majestic gait, completely like an instinctive soldier. Li Tianlan frowned, and his eyes subconsciously fell on his chest and shoulders. There were no epaulets on the man's shoulders, but there was a vague mark on his chest, like a dagger. It was very faint and vague, with only a vague outline. General Wang? Morning. Li Tianlan knew what to do and greeted him with a smile. In the whole dark world, only one troop in Zhongzhou State would use such a vague mark. That was the Shadow Sting Troop, known as the largest special forces in Zhongzhou State. Although the Shadow Sting Troop was a special force, it had always been under the dual management of the army headquarters and Kunlun City. It was very important in the special warfare system of Zhongzhou State. Its leader was the deputy of the theater, with the rank of lieutenant general, which could be said to be prestigious. Today, the leadership of the Shadow Sting Troop was in the hands of the Southeast Group, and it was a member of the Wang family of Beihai. The handsome man in the prime of his life was undoubtedly one of the core figures of the Wang family of Beihai, Lieutenant General Wang Zhaoyang, the leader of the Shadow Sting Troop. The internal structure of the Wang family of Beihai was extremely complicated. It was a supergiant that had always been in its heyday. Its internal structure was not as simple as 1 or 2 generations. In addition to the lineal descendants of Wang Tianzong, there were more than a dozen collateral branches, and each branch was extremely prosperous. There were hundreds of people in total. It was a real clan. Wang Zhaoyang was far from the lineal descendants of the Wang family of Beihai in terms of blood relationship, but he had a close personal relationship with Wang Xiaoyao. Wang Xingshao was also very polite to him. No matter what the occasion was, he would call him sixth uncle. His status in the Wang family of Beihai was self-evident. Moreover, in the phone call with Principal Zhuang Huayang, Li Tianlan also heard Zhuang Huayang mention Wang Zhaoyang and the Shadow Sting Troop. It was said that Wang Zhaoyang had been instructed by Great Master Wu and had a meteoric rise since he was young. He still had the potential to rise. This time, if Wang Xingshao failed to compete for the position of the general of 9 regions in the Terracotta Army, it was very likely that the Wang family of Beihai would let Wang Xingshao control the Shadow Sting Troop and push Wang Zhaoyang up after a few years. Li Tianlan would not be careless for such a figure who was not a lineal descendant of the Wang family of Beihai but was better than a lineal descendant. He shook hands with Wang Zhaoyang and took the initiative to ask again, "General, are you here for a walk?" "It's a good day for a walk, but I don't have the time." Wang Zhaoyang said with a smile, "I'm here to see you." Li Tianlan remained calm and kept calm. He smiled gently and said, "General, what's the matter?" The Shadow Sting Troop wants to form an alliance with young Master Li. What do you think, young Master Li? Wang Zhaoliang was a standard soldier. He was straightforward and liked to get straight to the point. However, his words carried a deep meaning. It was the Shadow Sting Troop that wanted to form an alliance with him. Not the Wang family of Beihai. But in fact, the Shadow Sting Troop had always been considered a part of the Wang family of Beihai's investment in East Island. They were naturally included in the know. 2 defensive zone that the Wang family of Beihai was in charge of. What was the deep meaning of this alliance? The Wang family of Beihai and Sai City were separated by the Shadow Sting Troop. Was this alliance the goodwill of the Wang family of Beihai? However, the Wang family of Beihai stayed out of it. It could attack and defend at any time. How sincere could such goodwill be? Li Tianlan narrowed his eyes and said with a smile, "I'll seriously consider your suggestion. I don't know what the alliance you're talking about is. Naturally, it's an ally who will give priority to support. Besides, we'll share some resources and intelligence." Wang Zhaoliang's voice was loud and clear. Li Tianlan's heart skipped a beat, but he remained silent. As the Wang family of Beihai that still occupied a large area of East Island, their infiltration in East Island was quite terrifying, and they were especially powerful in intelligence. Although Li Tianlan was the young governor of Sai City now, he could use the special channel of Samsara if he wanted to. Such sharing seemed to be harmless. However, the goodwill of the Wang family of Beihai was somewhat inexplicable. At this stage, was there really any intelligence that needed to be shared? Or maybe the information he needed wasn't about East Island? A cold light flashed in Li Tianlan's eyes. Did the Wang family of Beihai notice something? Or did they want to find out the background of the special channel of Samsara under the guise of sharing intelligence? In terms of intelligence, Sai City has a weak foundation in East Island. I'm afraid it can't help the Shadow Sting Troop. But in terms of resources and support, we're willing to ally with you, General. Li Tianlan said in a steady tone after a moment of silence. A strange light flashed in Wang Zhaoliang's eyes. He seemed to want to say something, but he finally held it back. He said with a smile, "Young Master Li, if you like the weapons and resources of the Shadow Sting Troop, just say the word. We're willing to exchange. If Sai City needs it, we'll support it as soon as possible." Li Tianlan nodded and said, Several supermasters of Samsara guarded the number 2 defensive zone in the middle, but they couldn't be regarded as people in the number 2 defensive zone. They were destined to wander all over the battlefield. And everyone, including Li Tianlan himself, believed that if he was in trouble, the supermasters of Samsara would definitely come to support him at all costs. Li Tianlan didn't know if the Wang family of Beihai had noticed something strange, but at least they hoped to get the support of the supermasters of Samsara in this alliance to some extent. Of course, in exchange, the support of the Shadow Sting Troop was also extremely important for Sai City. So, young Master Li, shall we have a good cooperation? Wang Zhaoliang smiled and reached out his hand. Besides, someone asked me to bring you a message. He lowered his voice slightly and continued, Kunlun City may not have invested much this time, but in fact, it has invested the most in East Island. Young Master Li, be careful. Li Tianlan's eyes suddenly became deep. He looked at Wang Zhaoliang and said slowly after a while, "Who asked you to bring me the message?" Wang Zhaoliang smiled and said nothing. Samsara? Li Tianlan's eyes became more and more focused. Wang Zhaoliang laughed and said that it was a good cooperation. Then he turned around and went down the mountain. Li Tianlan looked at his back in silence and didn't speak for a long time. Young master, the Wang family of Beihai can't be easily trusted. I received some secret news. It is said that the Wang family of Beihai and Kunlun City seem to be planning something, and a large part of the reason should be against you. Deep Dream stood behind Li Tianlan and said. Li Tianlan waved his hand, silently took out his mobile phone, and opened the communication software. Qin Weibai's account was still lying in the address book. It was still the same profile picture, quiet and unchanged. On the white paper, there were 2 lines of light and beautiful small words. Who are you to me? Who are I to you? Li Tianlan was silent. His fingers moved and he slowly typed. Did you tell me the news about Kunlun City through Wang Zhaoliang? There was no response. Li Tianlan didn't give up and continued to type. Don't worry about anything. I know what to do. If I were strong enough, everything would not be like this today, right? I will become stronger. Become the strongest. There was still no response. At the top of Li Tianlan's message, there were 3 words sent by Qin Weibai, but he didn't respond. I miss you so much. Li Tianlan took a deep breath and suddenly smiled. He typed, the woman that several invincible giants in the dark world dream of, I slept with her as soon as I met her, and I slept with her several times. Little Bai, do you think I'm the strongest? His mobile phone vibrated. Qin Weibai finally had a reply. 2 simple words, bad guy. Li Tianlan laughed, put away his mobile phone, and looked into the distance. In the sunshine of the 3rd day, he could clearly feel that something was approaching. Chapter 207. The alliance of the Shadow Sting Army was not necessarily all well-intentioned. In Kunlun City, it meant unknown dangers. Good and evil often meant different positions and schemes. Swords and sabers, mutual deception, and intrigues all appeared in the separation and reunion. Under the general trend where the invincible realm experts were like nonentities or weeds, only the most powerful self was the most trustworthy. Li Tianlan had understood this a long time ago. But he was still a little unaccustomed to wandering in the storm, witnessing and even experiencing all this. After coming out of the primeval forest on the border, he needed to adapt to more than just the outside world. He also needed to explore and familiarize himself with everything in the dark world. In a sense, adapting to the latter was even more significant and important than adapting to the former. This was his destined path in the future. For the rest of his life, everything in the dark world was destined to be the main melody of his life. The sudden storm, the thunder in the silent place, the unknown deceit, and the killing intent behind the smiling faces. He had to wander in this circle where there was no good or evil, no morality, and only a pure standpoint to distinguish between the enemy and the friend. Whether he sang all the way or kept a low profile, he had to figure out the essence through appearances, advance step by step, carry the whole Li family on his back as if walking on thin ice, and attack the peak of the dark world. The word life was too heavy. In his magnificent life, which seemed to take for granted, the unspeakable tiredness and hardships were the important cornerstones that supported the Li family's future glory. This was the general trend, and so was the destiny. Wang Zhaoliang of the Shadow Sting Army had gone far away. Li Tianlan's eyes were deep. He looked at his gradually blurring figure and was silent for a long time. He was looking at Wang Zhaoliang. Behind him, Deep Dream was watching him. At this moment, Li Tianlan seemed different from before. The ethereal sense of reality seemed to gradually disappear from him. He stood there quietly, but his whole person seemed distant and heavy. Restrained. All of his sharpness, emotions, and everything else were restrained to the extreme, and there was a faint sense of danger in his composure. Deep Dream looked at Li Tianlan in a daze and sighed softly. Sai City was not large, and there were not many top assassins in it. But every one of them was a famous figure in the dark world. Their strength was beyond doubt, and their cohesiveness was also well known. This was a power that seemed mysterious to the outside world, but internally, it did not place much importance on seniority. Deep Dream, Sunset Shadow, Cool Breeze, Drifting Cloud, and several other assassins. They would be respectful when facing tribulation and Situ Tsangyue, the city lord. But deep down, they did not feel that they were really unattainable. Whether it was the King of Shadow or the hidden god of Zhongzhou State, they were all very close and within reach. The feeling it was like they were one. Whatever they wanted to do, the city lord would do it for them. Whatever the city lord wanted to do, they would go through water and tread on fire for him. Since the establishment of Sai City, with the addition of one top assassin after another, it seemed that no one had ever cared about the goal and purpose of Sai City. And it seemed that Sai City didn't care about these things at all. This force existed aimlessly and almost aloof from the world. It seemed to be ignorant, but it had a special meaning in the hearts of the assassins. They were assassins and killers. In the darkest corner, they released their killing intent in the purest way. When the killing intent dissipated, they chose to go home. Killers had no home? What a joke! The world of ice and snow on Mount Taibai was the most sacred pure land in the hearts of everyone in Sai City. This was Sai City, a city of assassins with no internal rules, no purpose, no goals, and no hierarchy. It was an independent but closely united city of assassins. It was a force blooming with warmth in a mysterious and cold corner. Therefore, when Situ Tsangyue, the Castellan, announced that Li Tianlan would be the young governor of Sai City, every top assassin showed their support without hesitation. They did not bother to think about what this meant. Because all this was what Situ Tsangyue wanted to do, they would support her. Just like in the past, Situ Tsangyue would also support what they wanted to do. No matter how complicated things were inside Sai City, they could be simplified to the simple logic that if someone wanted to do it, then they would do it. Looking at Li Tianlan's back, Deep Dream had a complicated look in her eyes. She did not know how much the 19-year-old young man in front of her was shouldering, but she knew that this young city lord was not destined to be as simple and thorough as Sai City. The complexity and entanglement in his heart had long turned into obsession and penetrated deep into his bones. Instead of being purified, the whole Sai City would undergo some unexpected changes with his joining. As the top assassins of Sai City who had been active in the outside world in recent years, Deep Dream and Sunset Shadow both knew very well that this kind of change was not what the overall will of Sai City liked. In Li Tianlan's hands, Sai City would definitely become different. But for the first time in many years, Situ Tsangyue wanted to do something. In any case, they had no reason not to support her. No matter what she wanted to do. Young master, the goal of the Wang family of Beihai should be intelligence. When you mentioned intelligence just now, there was something wrong with Wang Zhaoyang. After a moment of silence, Deep Dream suppressed the messy thoughts in her heart and said softly, Li Tianlan was now the young city lord supported by the whole Sai City. No matter what would happen in the future, since she had made a choice, Deep Dream must consider things from Li Tianlan's standpoint. Li Tianlan nodded. When Wang Zhaoyang proposed to share intelligence, he felt that something was wrong, so he mentioned it tentatively. At that time, although Wang Zhaoyang hid it well, he still exposed something unusual. But what did it mean? It was obvious that the Wang family of Beihai had noticed the special channel of samsara, but Li Tianlan was not sure whether it was the mysterious ally around samsara that the Wang family of Beihai had noticed, or whether they just wanted to investigate the truth of samsara's intelligence agency through some clues. The land of East Island was extremely sensitive to Zhongzhou State, the Wang family of Beihai, and all the superpowers in the West. Now that the Wang family of Beihai had noticed it, the so-called kindness that Wang Zhaoyang showed today was likely to turn into naked hostility in the next second. Every one of these forces is simple. Even if they smile at you, they can make you uncomfortable. Li Tianlan laughed at himself, turned around, and went down the mountain. Let's go back. Deep Dream followed Li Tianlan closely. She was indeed a beauty. At the most mature age, her every move was enchanting and seductive. The faint smell of perfume surrounded her. Quietly, Deep Dream's voice became softer and more charming. Walking beside Li Tianlan, she said softly, "There are too many schemes in the dark world, and the murderous intent is too strong. This is a fact that can't be changed. Most of the fights can't be handled by ordinary people. Although we are assassins, we have always been very pure. Killing is killing, and we basically stay as far away from some intrigues as possible." She paused and seemed to hesitate, but she still said in a charming tone and giggled, "Of course, we're not so clean. But in the past few years, I've been traveling outside, and I have a lot of experience in how to avoid disputes after killing people. Young master, do you need Deep Dream to share with you?" Li Tianlan's steps seemed to stiffen, but he immediately returned to normal. His expression was calm, but his eyes grew deeper and deeper. He gave Deep Dream a meaningful look. In the other party's somewhat flustered expression, He suddenly smiled leisurely and said, "Do you know what I was thinking just now?" Deep Dream uttered a syllable in confusion, but her heart was in a mess. She kept thinking about the meaning in Li Tianlan's eyes when he looked at her. What she said just now could not be called a warning, but it could be said to be an exhortation, and it also contained a little longing in her heart. However, she was a woman, and a very beautiful woman. Testing Li Tianlan with such a gentle and charming tone should not arouse his disgust. But somehow, she always felt a little uneasy in her heart. "I was just thinking," Li Tianlan chuckled and said, "in the future, most of our enemies or friends will come from the dark world, from the major forces in the dark world, such as the Wang family of Beihai, Kunlun City, some foreign behemoths, or some domestic special agencies. This circle is very complicated, so complicated that no matter whether you are brilliant or ordinary, as long as you enter this circle, everyone has to struggle carefully to survive. Even someone as strong as Wang Tianzong, who ranks first on the divine list, has to be cautious when leading the entire Wang family of Beihai. Force and wisdom, conspiracy and betrayal, survival and death, war and standpoint, this circle that includes everything is too big and too complicated. Deep Dream, in such an environment, can anyone really stand aloof from the world?" Deep Dream forced a smile, and her face seemed a little pale. In this world, nothing can represent everything. What can guarantee survival is not even force and wisdom, but prudence. This is the dark world in my heart. Li Tianlan slowly walked over the land under his feet. His tone was neither indifferent nor passionate, but there was an indelible depression in his calmness. "This is also my path. Wang Zhaoyang and I formed an alliance, so I would subconsciously think about his deeper purpose. He reminded me to be careful of Kunlun City, so I would think about Samsara Palace, the trump card of Kunlun City, and the mentality of the Wang family of Beihai. So I suddenly thought of a very interesting question. In this cruel and dark world, I am destined to meet different people and different conspiracies in the future. What will I be like in 10 or 20 years? His voice became lower and lower, and the brilliance in his eyes became more restrained. A heavenly son? An ambitious man? Or a pile of bones? I won't be a pile of bones. Deep Dream opened her mouth subconsciously, and her tone was firm. Li Tianlan's words seemed to be full of emotion. Deep Dream didn't know if she was thinking too much. But she had just tested Li Tianlan, and now she heard these words. She had to take them as Li Tianlan's answer to her. At this point, Deep Dream had to make a clear statement. Although Li Tianlan's words were flat, she could feel the increasing pressure in them. If Deep Dream had seen Li Tianlan's calmness and emptiness, as well as his solemnity and sharpness, then on such a sunny morning, she clearly felt the gloominess in the depths of Li Tianlan's heart that was like a needle hidden in silk floss. Her test just now was nothing more than to express that Sai City still liked the previous attitude of standing aloof from the world. But Li Tianlan talked about his attitude that he was destined to be unable to stay away from disputes in the future. Deep Dream didn't know what would happen if she insisted on her opinion. But when she thought of Li Tianlan's meaningful eyes just now, she felt a little cold in her heart. At this moment, Deep Dream was in a trance. If this temperamental young governor joined Sai City and was destined to change the city of assassins, then what she had just said might make her the main force to change Sai City. But Deep Dream had no choice. As long as Sai City is there, no one dares to hurt young master. No one in Sai City will agree. Deep Dream said calmly. Li Tianlan glanced at her with a smile and said lightly, "Really?" Deep Dream's heart grew colder, and she said in a slightly bitter tone, "Time will prove everything." "Yes, time will tell." Li Tianlan nodded. "I can't give you a clear answer. Perhaps only time will tell each and every one of us the answer. But I can tell you that everything I've worked so hard since I was young is so that my family and friends can be free and happy." Deep Dream was slightly stunned. She had never expected that behind the young master's gloomy and almost murderous answer, she would finally get such an answer. "So that my family and friends can be free and happy? What is freedom?" Li Tianlan walked down the slope. He looked up at the sky. As far as the eye could see, white clouds were drifting in the sky and passing through the sunlight, changing constantly. Freedom. Of course, it means doing whatever you want. Deep Dream thought seriously for a while and then said softly. Li Tianlan shook his head calmly. At this moment, there was an inexplicable brilliance in his eyes. He chuckled and said calmly, "In my opinion, the so-called freedom means not doing what you don't want to do." Deep Dream was thoughtful. This answer seemed to be the same as his whole person. He was reserved but wild at the same time. "Tell me the secret news you've heard." Li Tianlan stopped and simply lay on the grass. Looking up at the blue sky and white clouds above, his tone gradually became faint. "What are the Wang family of Beihai and Kunlun City plotting?" "It's not a plot. It can be said that they're working together to promote something." Deep Dream thought about it seriously. The former Sai city did have the demeanor of an individual immortal who lived in the mortal world but ignored the secular world. He basically didn't care about the affairs between the superpowers and the overall situation of Zhongzhou state. Although he had heard some news at the beginning, he didn't think about it at all. "At that time, I had just returned to Mount Taibai from Snow Country. Gu Qianchuan and Wang Jingwei came to Sai City together. They seemed to want Your Highness to support one of their proposals. These two families seem to be preparing to improve the special warfare system's voice in Zhongzhou state." This news was not much different from nothing. Li Tianlan shook his head and asked casually, "Who is Wang Jingwei?" "The head of the military staff department." Deep Dream simply said, "One of the core figures of the Wang family of Beihai." Li Tianlan's pupils contracted slightly. The head of the military staff department, which ranked first in the 4 headquarters of Zhongzhou state, was a real power figure in the entire military world, even the most powerful one. In his chat with Ning Qianqing, Li Tianlan also knew that Ning Qianqing's father, Ning Ziyuan, the commander of the Eastern Theater of Operations, was most eager for this position. Although the two were at the same level, the former was the fastest way to be promoted to the rank of marshal. Such a powerful figure in the military world and the second in command of Kunlun City went to Mount Taibai in an attempt to promote the special warfare system's voice in Zhongzhou state. How did the specific plan work? And what did it have to do with him? It said that Kunlun City had this kind of movement many years ago, but it didn't pass at that time. At that time, the strongest opposition was from the Wang family of Beihai. Now it seems that the Wang family of Beihai has relented. Deep Dream shook her head. She didn't know what the specific plan was, but at that time, Sidhu Sangyue said some harsh words, which mentioned the Li family, and finally refused the request of the Wang family of Beihai and Kunlun City. It could be seen that even if the Li family didn't account for the whole reason, it was at least a very important part of the reason. Now seeing Li Tianlan, Deep Dream was more and more convinced of her speculation. Recently, the muscles at the corners of Li Tianlan's eyes twitched. He thought for a while and said, "When exactly? At the end of May and the beginning of June? I forget the exact time." Deep Dream seemed a little embarrassed. "I don't pay much attention to the domestic affairs of Zhongzhou state. I stayed in Mount Taibai for less than a day before I went to Bili state." Li Tianlan fell silent. The period from the end of May to the beginning of June happened to be around the time when he met Wang Tianzong for the first time in Huading. Did it have anything to do with each other? "It's okay." He was silent for a while and said lightly, "The Wang family of Beihai and Kunlun City joined hands to promote the status of the special warfare system in Zhongzhou state, which was a good thing for anyone in the special warfare system." Although Deep Dream speculated that there was a reason for this to target the Li family, at least so far, Li Tianlan couldn't see the harm of this matter to the Li family. Moreover, this matter was destined to happen after the final battle of Changdao. When he returned to Zhongzhou state, it wouldn't be too late to sit back and watch the ups and downs inside Zhongzhou state. At least in this final battle, the proposal jointly promoted by the Wang family of Beihai and Kunlun City has little to do with us," he said slowly. Deep Dream nodded. "At present, the most important thing to guard against is Kunlun City. Wang Zhaoyang's reminder is very meaningful. Young master, If Kunlun City has a backup plan in East Island, what do you think it will be? How would I know? Li Tanlan smiled, but there was no smile in his clear and gentle eyes. I only care about what they want to do now. Looking closely at the list of people Kunlun City had invested in East Island, the weirdness was almost obvious. They had indeed invested too little power. As the promoter of this plan, if they only relied on this list, it would be difficult to get the approval of the high-level officials, and many special warfare agencies of the empire would be dissatisfied. Such a small investment was not worthy of the position of the power center of the special warfare system of Zhongzhou State. Wang Zhaoyang's reminder was timely and in line with common sense. Under normal circumstances, it was normal for Kunlun City to invest more power than the Wang family of Beihai and Sai City in this national plot. But at least for now, everything in Kunlun City was very normal. If they invested more than the Wang family of Beihai and Sai City, what resources could they invest in secretly? And what would these resources, which had not seen the light of day, do after his identity as the successor of the Li family was exposed? Li Tanlan pressed his lips tightly, and his eyes were cruel and cold. If this reminder came from Samsara and Wang Zhaoyang didn't explain it, it could only prove that Samsara still hadn't caught the resources that Kunlun City had secretly invested in East Island. If they want to hide it from everyone and invest secretly, at least they can't be too conspicuous. They can only invest a small number of artifacts, people, or intelligence. What can Kunlun City invest? Li Tanlan narrowed his eyes and muttered to himself. Intelligence is impossible. Deep Dream shook her head directly. Because of the Wang family of Beihai, Kunlun City's development in East Island is not smooth, and they can't get useful intelligence. As for artifacts, Kunlun City doesn't have murderous weapons, and it's not as good as the Dongqing clan and the Wang family of Beihai in making weapons. It's also impossible. So, it's people? Li Tanlan said softly. People. Several experts of Kunlun City went to Northern Europe with Gu Qianchuan, and some stayed in Zhongzhou State. Although the experts in their headquarters are mysterious, there won't be many real experts. Humph, in the whole Kunlun City, only Gu Xingyun and Gu Qianchuan are barely men. Others can't affect the overall situation. Before Deep Dream finished, Li Tianlan suddenly stood up. Men! He looked at Deep Dream with burning eyes, and his eyes were getting brighter and brighter. At this moment, for no reason, he suddenly thought of his first meeting with Gong Sun Chi. At the same time, he thought of the Dongqing clan's reminder. Gong Sun Chi had said that there was a young man in Zhongzhou State who was going to participate in the plot against East Island, but he was stopped. And the person who stopped the young man had already arrived in East Island. Gong Sun Chi told him to be careful. The Dongqing clan reminded him to be careful of Phoenix Pavilion. Wang Zhaoyang also reminded him to be careful. Jiang Shangyu told him that Phoenix Pavilion had close ties with Kunlun City. Deep Dream said that only Gu Xingyun and Gu Qianchuan were barely men in Kunlun City. Then, what if it was a woman? Li Tianlan's heart beat wildly. He felt as if he had caught something, but something was missing. Deep Dream. He looked at Deep Dream and said solemnly, "Have you heard of Phoenix Pavilion?" Chapter 208. The voice was very close, but it seemed to be suppressed very low, sounding in Li Tianlan's ears with a little coldness and resentment. It was supposed to be a clear and sexy voice, but the tone was as cold as the wind in hell. Li Tianlan turned his head sharply. Less than 10 meters behind him, a sexy and plump figure stood there quietly, looking at Li Tianlan calmly. A strange look flashed in Li Tianlan's eyes. The woman in front of him was a wonderful beauty in all aspects. She was about 1.7 meters tall, with a plump and well-proportioned figure. The tight white suit lightly clung to her body, and her breasts, waist, and hips were vividly displayed under the suit. The skirt of the suit was very short, and a pair of white, delicate, and slender legs were exposed in the morning sun, seeming to shine with an intoxicating soft luster. She wore a pair of high-heeled shoes nearly 10 centimeters high, which made her legs look more straight and attractive. This was a woman who looked about 26 or 27 years old. She had just the right facial features and a little makeup, which gave her a very amazing charm. The soft wind blew some of her long hair, and the woman naturally reached out her hand to comb it. The corners of her mouth rose into a charming and delicate smile. For a moment, Li Tianlan couldn't describe whether the woman was amorous or something else, because under her seductive attire and charming smile, her temperament was always arrogant, even holy. This was a woman Li Tianlan was no stranger to. He had seen her sharpness and strength, her weakness and hardship, and her helplessness and persistence. But this morning he saw her charm and arrogance. Li Tianlan hadn't paid much attention to her. He had met her a few times before, and he always felt that everything about her was a facade. No matter what posture she showed, there seemed to be only numbness and dead silence in her eyes, as if this was her essence. Du, Li Tianlan opened his mouth and forgot her specific name for a moment, so he could only vaguely say, "Senior Sister Du? My name is Du Hanin." The woman chuckled, and her clear voice became more and more delicate. It had to be said that the temperament she showed was really unique. She was proud and charming at the same time, which could easily arouse a man's desire to conquer. However, Li Tianlan was basically immune to this kind of charm now. It was not that he was aloof, but his current state seemed to be really like what Li Baidian said, a tragedy. His starting point in terms of women was really too high. He had Qin Weibai and stripped the little princess of the Wang family of Beihai. Now he also had a stunning fiancée by his side. Although Du Hanin was also a real beauty, he somewhat looked down on her. Du Hanin. Li Tianlan nodded. He really didn't pay much attention to this senior student who stayed in the Sky Academy. His more vivid impression was that in the entrance maneuver, when he was escaping from Lu Xiuwei, the former deputy director of the teaching office of the Sky Academy, Du Hanin successfully injured Li Baidian with a small team that was not very good. Then, she tied with Wang Yuetong in the first actual combat lesson. Du Hanin seemed to be valued by the enchantress of the Wang family of Beihai. It was because of the intervention of the enchantress that Wang Yuetong, Li Baidian and others did not pursue the matter of the sneak attack in the entrance maneuver. As for other impressions, he had no. Moreover, Qin Weibai specially prepared a list of key teachers and students of the Sky Academy for him, and Du Hanin's name was not included on the list. Therefore, although they could be regarded as classmates, Li Tianlan did not have a deep impression of her. He had never thought that Du Hanin would know about Phoenix Pavilion. Li Tianlan was instinctively wary of such an unknown force. Jiang Shangyu's biggest motive for wanting to kill him was because of someone in Phoenix Pavilion. Li Tianlan did not know what relationship he had with that person, but at least in Jiang Shangyu's heart, that person thought that he had something to do with him, or at least they were likely to cross paths in the future. Moreover, the reminder of the Dongqing clan, especially the kind of reminder that was difficult to speak of, seemed to explain the problem. Especially when he talked about Phoenix Pavilion with Qin Weibai. Qin Weibai's look was obviously a little strange. All of this showed that Phoenix Pavilion was absolutely not simple. Was Phoenix Pavilion the secret investment of Kunlun City in East Island this time? Jiang Shangyu's killing intent, Gong Sunqi's warning, the Dongqing clan's difficult to speak of, and Wang Zhaoyang's reminder. All of this seemed to be traceable, but Li Tianlan always felt that some very key clues were missing. He pondered, looked at Du Hanin in front of him very gently, and said softly, "Senior sister, do you know Phoenix Pavilion?" "I don't know, but I've heard that it has something to do with Kunlun City." Du Hanin shook her head and raised her delicate eyebrows, as if she was hesitating. "Who told you that?" Li Tianlan asked directly. Kunlun City had been established for 20 years, but few people knew about Phoenix Pavilion, which was related to it. This was not a normal phenomenon at all. Enemies. Du Hanin's tone was strange, and there was a faint killing intent in the air. She could see Li Tianlan's solemnity now, but in the end she sighed. "I know about Phoenix Pavilion, but I've just heard someone mention it. I don't know much more than you, young governor." Li Tianlan frowned and said directly, "Senior sister, can you tell me more about it?" Du Hanin did not speak, nor did she approach him. She had been standing where she was, keeping a subtle distance from Li Tianlan. They seemed to be chatting with each other, but there was also a sense of confrontation between them. This senior sister, who was a stunner in both appearance and temperament, had obviously dressed up today. She had spoken softly and kept a low posture. But at this moment, after a short hesitation, Li Tianlan clearly noticed that the look in her eyes had changed. It was a kind of scrutinizing gaze, examining him, the young master of Sai City, as if she wanted to confirm something. Li Tianlan waited quietly without saying a word. He was so quiet that there was no sharpness or aura, and he was extremely restrained. About 6 months ago, Du Han-in finally spoke, and her clear voice became a little dry. I was attacked when I was on a mission in the northwest of Zhongzhou State. At that time, I fled for nearly 300 miles before I escaped. The main reason was that they wanted to capture me alive and didn't kill me. They were 2 experts at the peak of the fire-flaming realm, belonging to a core subordinate agency of Kunlun City. When I was seriously injured, they mentioned Phoenix Pavilion. Du Han-in paused, recalled it carefully, and then said slowly, at that time, their original words were, since you are so good at serving men, we might as well send you to Phoenix Pavilion. I think many people are interested in having a taste of the first miss of the Du family. Li Tianlan suddenly raised his eyebrows. Serving men? Phoenix Pavilion? Thoughts surged in his mind. Looking at the graceful Du Han-in in front of him in a white suit, his eyes instinctively became a little strange. Don't look at me like that. Du Han-in suddenly smiled charmingly. Her smile was sweet, but her eyes, which had always looked numb, were a little sad. I'm really good at serving men. I think I'm talented in this respect, right? In the Sky Academy, I've had 9 men in more than a year. From the first one to the last one, none of the men who used me said anything bad about me. She gently licked her delicate red lips with her pink tongue. Her eyes were like silk, but there was a kind of almost crazy sadness and despair in them. It was the pain and sadness of a newly healed scar being forcibly opened. There was an unforgettable madness in her calmness. Du Han-in looked into Li Tianlan's eyes and said with a sweet smile, Junior brother, do you want to have a taste of me? You can do whatever you want. Li Tianlan's expression didn't change at all, but his eyes became deeper. It was a pair of extremely deep eyes, like a starry sky or an abyss, with a kind of vast and silent power. In this pair of eyes, Du Han-in saw neither lust nor contempt, only calmness. Senior sister, you must have some difficulties, right? Li Tianlan suddenly said. Du Han-in bit her lip hard and stubbornly looked at Li Tianlan without saying a word. She had thought that her soul and body had long been numb, and that the nightmarish, humiliating scenes of the past had already faded away. But in front of this pair of young but deep eyes, Du Han-in was surprised to find that she was trembling. All the humiliation and despair of the past were wildly transmitted to every corner of her body. Her vision gradually blurred. She just clenched her trembling fists, bit her lip, and tried to maintain her calmness and pride, as well as the so-called charm that she hated most. Li Tianlan took out a cigarette and lit it, lost in thought. At this moment he suddenly thought of himself. Not the present self, but the self before he entered the secular world. At that time, he was also a young master, the young master of the Li family. He took a deep drag on the cigarette and laughed at himself. Those who had not struggled in a desperate situation would never understand the helplessness and stubbornness of always wanting to fight in despair, nor would they feel the madness and resentment after seeing a little hope. The road of life had never been smooth. In the bumpy road, people would advance and retreat, fall, get injured, and bleed. Some people might give up everything in the process of moving forward, but as long as they were still persevering, there would be a reason in their hearts to persevere to the end. Li Tianlan was like that. So was Du Han-in. The Du family in the northwest. Deep Dream opened her mouth softly, looked at Du Han-in, and said in a complicated tone, Are you the first miss of the Du family? Du Han-in nodded, then shook her head and laughed at herself. There is no Du family in the northwest. There is no first Mississippi. Just a wandering ghost. Li Tianlan looked at Deep Dream. In front of Du Han-in, he did not hide anything and asked straightforwardly, "What's going on with the Du family?" Deep Dream looked at Du Han-in. In the other party's silence, she shook her head and said, "The Du family in the northwest was originally a first-line wealthy family in Zhongzhou State, even stronger. It was deeply rooted in the northwest of Zhongzhou State and had great influence. Du Yuanshan, the head of the family, was also one of the few experts of the half-step invincible realm in Zhongzhou State. But since Du Yuanshan failed to compete with Jiang Shan of the Jiang family for the position of General of 9 regions, the Du family began to go downhill. First, there was internal strife, then Du Yuanshan was assassinated, and the Du family was wiped out by the Prince Group and the Special Warfare Group in the chaos." There was no fluctuation in Deep Dream's voice. She just told the story she knew in a normal way. There may be some secrets, but Sai City doesn't pay much attention to them and hasn't investigated them much. The collapse of the Du family was spectacular, and the whole Zhongzhou state was in an uproar. Although Deep Dream didn't pay attention to these things, it didn't mean that she was stupid. She didn't bother to think about it before, but now that Li Tianlan became their young governor and began to contact the Du family, she could roughly speculate something after thinking about it, but she was not sure. The Du family was destroyed about 3 years ago, and Du Yuanshan was assassinated earlier. He was also one of the top 10 experts in Zhongzhou State. He was very close to the academics and was one of the super experts of the academics. At that time, there was a rumor that after he failed to compete with Jiang Shan for the position of General of 9 regions, the academics had planned to transfer Du Yuanshan to Huading and replace Zhuang Huayang as the headmaster of the Sky Academy, but before she finished speaking, Li Tianlan had already understood what she meant. The academics could now be said to be a group standing on the commanding heights of Zhongzhou State. But it was not the case more than 3 years ago. That should be the most sensitive period for the academics to attack the commanding heights. The general trend of Zhongzhou State was controlled by the Prince Group, and the most prominent authority of Zhongzhou State was at the time when the new replaced the old. Was the destruction of the Du family a big move carried out by the Prince Group in conjunction with the Special Warfare Group when it withdrew from the commanding heights of power? If it covered the entire northwest region of Zhongzhou State, then it was indeed a big move. Li Tianlan sneered, and his eyes were cold. The Prince Group, the behemoth of Zhongzhou State, was really accompanied by blood before it rose up and down. The destruction of the Du family undoubtedly helped the Jiang family in Beijiang and Jiang Shangyu's family. But Li Tianlan couldn't figure out why the academics didn't stop it at that time. The academics was extremely weak in the special warfare system. As a half-step invincible realm expert, Du Yuanshan was definitely one of the most important figures of the academics. Besides, the Du family was a real wealthy family. How could it be destroyed so easily? Even if Du Yuanshan was assassinated, they should have shown an attitude of protection. For Li Tianlan, this was definitely not a historical problem. Although he was now the young governor of Sai City, he had temporarily joined the academics and would be the representative of the academics in the special warfare system in the future. Inevitably, what happened to the Du family would make Li Tianlan feel puzzled. He wanted to know the attitude of the academics toward him at the critical moment. During the period when the Du family was destroyed, Li Huaqing, the leader of the academics, was about to take the last step. But Li Tianlan didn't believe that the academics at that time really had no time to take care of other things. What was the attitude of the academics at that time? Li Tianlan looked at Du Han-in and asked. It was impossible for an individual immortal like Deep Dream to know the answer to this kind of question. As the person involved, Du Han-in should know better. What attitude could they have? Du Han-in said coldly, "The Prince Group and the Special Warfare Group took action at the same time, and other groups also got benefits. How could the academics have a clear attitude during that sensitive period? Young governor, don't you have an engagement with the Dongqing clan? One of the benefits that the giant group got was that Mrs. Dongqing by Qingqian could become the governor of Qinzhou. What's more, the academics didn't get nothing. Although the Du family is gone, they have been operating in the Northwest in recent years. They gave up the right to speak in the Northwest Special Warfare System and got more in other aspects. A few months ago, Governor Bai went to Guangdong from Qinzhou, and Qinzhou province also fell into their control. Oh, the rise and fall of wealthy families? In the eyes of those bigwigs, it's just a pure transaction. The rise and fall of wealthy families was just a transaction. In the general trend, the wealthy families were nothing more than pawns. Li Tianlan's eyes were clear. He looked at Du Hanyin in front of him and asked, "Do you hate me?" Obviously, the destruction of the Du family had also destroyed Du Hanyin's life. The daughter of a wealthy family, who had an extraordinary status in the Sky Academy, had become what? In more than a year, she had had 9 men. In a desperate situation, women often had to face greater humiliation than men. "What do you think?" Du Hanyin said blandly, "In the last Sky Academy, I was one of the strongest, and I also had a place among the top 10 experts of the young generation. My brother, my fiancé, and I wanted to win the Sky Academy and revive the reputation of the Du family, but what happened? My fiancé killed my brother for the sake of his future. I originally had the wind vein, but it was also destroyed by him. My strength fell from the fire-flaming realm to the ice-condensing realm. I failed 8 out of 12 tasks, and my credits became negative once. In order to get the most basic dozens of credits a month, I had to take the initiative to seduce some powerful men. If you were me, would you hate me?" "So you came to me today," Li Tianlan said with a smile. "Do you want to avenge you with the help of Sai City?" He was not surprised by Du Hanyin's choice. It might not be a good choice, but as long as she wanted revenge, it was Du Hanyin's only choice. Du Hanyin's own hatred was easy to deal with. No matter how strong her fiancé, who had betrayed her, was, after all, a student of the last session, and would not achieve much for the time being. But the target of the Du family's hatred was Kunlun City and the Prince Group. From this point of view, Li Tianlan's goal was the same as hers. After his identity was exposed and he became the young master of Sai City, it was reasonable for Du Hanyin to come to him. At least in the entire Zhongzhou state, there was really an irreconcilable hatred with Kunlun City, and he was the only one who might have the strength, power, and potential to take revenge in the future. Although the enchantress of the Wang family of Beihai liked Du Hanyin, it was mostly out of personal sympathy. It was impossible for the Wang family of Beihai, a behemoth, to fight against Kunlun City for Du Hanyin. Not to mention that the Wang family of Beihai and Kunlun City were secretly planning something. Even if there was nothing fishy between them, Du Hanyin herself was not worth the Wang family of Beihai's help. "I want to join Sai City, follow you, and sharpen my martial arts." Du Hanyin looked straight at Li Tianlan. "As for revenge, we have the same enemy." "Indeed." Li Tianlan nodded. "But why should I promise you? I have a grudge against Kunlun City, but it doesn't mean that I want to draw everyone who has a grudge against Kunlun City to Sai City. Whether I'm the young governor or Li Tianlan, I'm on the weaker side now. If I take you in, I have to take risks. So, although it's hard to hear, I have to say that whether it's for self-protection now or revenge in the future, I won't keep useless people around me. I have my value." Du Hanyin was not embarrassed or flustered. Her clear voice was steady and full of confidence. Li Tianlan raised his eyebrows and remained calm. "First of all, my identity. Although the Du family has been destroyed, there are still some uncles who are willing to help me. They can't do anything in the Sky Academy, but outside the Sky Academy, they are very valuable assets. Especially if I can join Sai City, the effect of this network will be more obvious. The Du family's influence is concentrated in the Northwest. If young master wants to establish his own foundation in the Northwest after graduation, my network can play a great role." Du Hanyin's voice grew more and more shocked. She looked at Li Tianlan seriously and continued, "As long as young master's performance is amazing enough, it's not impossible for you to set up a group in the future." Li Tianlan's face did not change, but he was thinking seriously. Setting up a group was too far away for him to think about it. He was even hesitating about where to set up his own foundation. At present, the foundation of East Emperor Palace was naturally in Huading, but Huading was destined not to become Li Tianlan's backyard in a short time. If there were general trends converging inside Zhongzhou State, Then Huading, which was the focus of all the major groups, would naturally be the focus. With Samsara Palace drifting away from him, it was impossible for him to control Huading alone with Sai City. On this matter, the academic's attitude would even be vague. It was already the best situation to set up a foundation in an area of Huading and seek development in the game of all the major forces. Li Tianlan's vision could not be limited to Huading, but the current situation was that besides Huading, where should he go to develop had become a big problem. Whether it was Taoist Xian Xuanzi instructing him to go to Wei or Metaphysics Grandmaster Great Master Wei advising him to go to Jiangxia, they were all the territory of the Southeast Group. If he acted rashly, he would only be attacked by the Wang family of Beihai. As for the Northeast, as the young governor of Sai City, it was impossible for him to compete with Sai City. The Southwest was occupied by the Prince Group. The South was the top priority of the Special Warfare Group's development in recent years. As for the Northwest, from the perspective of the Special Warfare System, it could almost be regarded as the base camp of Kunlun City. But from the overall perspective, the power of the academics was also not weak. It was indeed a good choice to use the political power of the academics in the Northwest to defeat Kunlun City in the Special Warfare System, which meant it was easier to get the support of the academics. But it was tantamount to fighting with Kunlun City head-on. What was most needed was strength. After 3 years in the Sky Academy, if Li Tianlan could reach the peak of the thunder-shocking realm, he would not hesitate to go to the Northwest. But Li Tianlan himself also knew that it was not realistic to reach the peak of the thunder-shocking realm in 3 years. Li Tianlan shook his head. The speed at which he improved his strength now completely affected his future path. He did not want to think too much about this problem for the time being. But Du Hanin's statement did prove her value. It might not be a big deal for the Wang family of Beihai, but it was very important for him. Go on. He lowered his eyelids and said lightly, "My body." There was unspeakable cruelty and determination in Du Hanin's sexy voice. "I think I'm pretty, and I'm not only good at serving men, but also seducing them. As long as I can get revenge, I'm willing to pay anything. If you want, young master, I'm also willing to set up a Phoenix Pavilion that belongs to you." Phoenix Pavilion. Li Tianlan had not figured out the situation of this organization so far, but according to the clues provided by Du Hanin, he knew some of the functions of Phoenix Pavilion. No matter how mysterious this organization was, at least one of its functions was to serve men. If that was all, Li Tianlan did not think this organization could pose any threat to him in this battle of Changdao. He was silent, waiting for Du Hanin to continue. "And my combat capability?" Du Hanin gently stretched out her hand. On her slender white fingers, a flame suddenly appeared. It was a very subtle flame, but the air around it twisted with a bang. The temperature was so hot that in the twisted air, Du Hanin's body seemed to become blurred. The flame gradually expanded. At this moment, Du Hanin was dazzling in the flame like a phoenix reborn from the fire. Her whole body showed a kind of powerful aura that even moved Li Tianlan. Deep Dream's expression changed slightly. He seemed to be in disbelief as he said, "After your wind vein was crippled, it recovered?" "It's not a recovery, but a mutation, because this wind vein is stronger than before." Du Hanin said slowly. Li Tianlan took a deep breath, and his eyes gradually became serious. "I used to be in the fire-flaming realm. Although I fell to the ice-condensing realm, with the mutation of the wind vein, my strength also returned to the peak. Young master, give me time. I won't lose to anyone." In the flame, Du Hanin's eyes were clear and bright, and all the numbness was fading. That was her value. "Young master, Tribulation may be very interested in her," Deep Dream said in a serious tone. Tribulation was the only super assassin with double wind veins in the Dark World. He would definitely study the mutated wind vein. Li Tianlan was silent. After a long time, he said blandly, "You are valued by the enchantress of the Wang family of Beihai. I don't like it. In this battle of Changdao, I hope you can show an attitude." Du Hanin's face changed, but she finally nodded and said, "I understand." The phone suddenly rang. Deep Dream took out his cell phone and answered it. After saying a few words, he frowned and hung up. Young Master, Military Counselor and Gong Sun Chi signed the investigation order at the same time. They hope that Sai City can send elites to investigate other forces around the number 3 defensive zone. The Wang family of Beihai and Kunlun City also received the same order. Deep Dream looked at Li Tianlan and asked, "Who should we send?" After the investigation, it meant that the final battle was imminent. Li Tianlan's pupils contracted slightly. In the sun, he stood up and said, "I'll go." Chapter 209. For any force except East Island, Changdao was not a suitable place for the final battle. It was no exaggeration to say that in Changdao, almost all the force's advantages were suppressed to the lowest point. Only East Island, which had the home advantage, could be like a fish in water in this environment. Changdao was one of the most deserted cities in the whole East Island. This city had been bombed by nuclear weapons and had been a piece of scorched earth for a long time. Now, even if there were people here, they were quite sparsely populated. As for the area where the major forces were lurking, this space with a radius of 100 miles was even more unbelievably deserted. Now, East Island had no way to retreat. So for the upcoming final battle, they showed a very determined attitude from the beginning. The Divine Wind Force signed the mobilization order immediately. The 3 giants, Liuhua Palace, Jifeng Sword Raining School, and Wuji Palace, fully supported them. The Kusanagi Force was fully activated. All the elite forces of the Special Warfare System of East Island were gathering toward Changdao. Changdao was sparsely populated. No matter how good the major forces were at hiding, they couldn't hide flawlessly in this empty environment. East Island basically didn't take much effort to locate the general positions of the major forces. Then, in the name of maneuver, it sent out troops and blocked the area with a radius of about 100 kilometers. There was no doubt that this was the battlefield of the final battle. The area with a radius of 100 kilometers was neither big nor small. There were 4 villages and 1 town here, with a population of no more than thousands. When the evacuation order of East Island was issued, all the civilians had left as soon as possible. The whole battlefield, whether it was day or night, was as quiet as a ghost town. The night covered the sky. There was no moon tonight, and the misty and sparse starlight was reflected in the silent wilderness. The world was quiet, and there was only the sound of insects around. A dark gray MPV was driving at a constant speed on the flat road. The vehicle did not turn on its lights and was only moving forward under the sparse starlight. In the hazy and dim light, the vehicle, which was not considered small, had a vague feeling of being in a trance. It looked creepy and strange. "Young Master, we have to walk 2 kilometers ahead." In the passenger seat of the car, Deep Dream looked down at the screen in her hand and said calmly, "Is there a target ahead?" Li Tianlan had been looking out of the window quietly. When he heard Deep Dream's words, he turned his head directly. "There is a village about 12 kilometers ahead. The villagers have already been evacuated. It should be the gathering place of a certain force, most likely the force belonging to East Island. But I don't know what kind of organization it is." Deep Dream fiddled with the screen in her hand and shook her head. "The radar signal ahead is very strong. We can only sneak in and investigate on foot." Li Tianlan nodded. Now their car was painted with the paint of a stealth fighter. Coupled with some special car bodies, it was difficult to be discovered in the dark if one did not look carefully. Although this paint could shield the radar signal, it would be completely ineffective if the target was too close. After all, vehicles and fighter jets were different. A distance of more than 10 kilometers was nothing for a stealth fighter jet. If a stealth fighter jet could invade an area 10 kilometers away from the target, the destruction would be unimaginable. But the car could only move forward bit by bit. Even if they were painted with this precious paint, they could not really get close to the enemy's hinterland. Furthermore, their mission this time wasn't to fight. Reconnaissance was their main mission. Silently putting a cigarette to his mouth, Li Tianlan fumbled for a lighter on his body. He nodded and said vaguely, "Then go 2 kilometers ahead and sneak in on foot." Deep Dream nodded and continued to stare at the screen in her hand, saying nothing more. Li Tianlan fumbled for a long time but still couldn't find the lighter. He inadvertently turned his head and directly met a pair of quiet eyes that were as clear as water. The expression on the beautiful face was very soft, but the other party's eyes were staring at the cigarette in his mouth. "I can't smoke anymore." Dongqing Rushi shook her head. Holding the lighter in her small white hand, she said, "It will leave a smell. If there is an accident later, it will be inconvenient for us to retreat." Li Tianlan smiled and took the cigarette out of his mouth. After thinking for a while, he said, "With our lineup, it won't be a big problem." Zhongzhou State attached great importance to this reconnaissance mission. In each of the 3 defensive zones, 6 or 7 reconnaissance teams were sent, with different numbers of people. Li Tianlan's team belonged to the number 3 defensive zone. It might not have the most people in each reconnaissance team, but its strength was the strongest. There were 5 people in their reconnaissance team: Deep Dream, Sunset Shadow, Li Tianlan, Du Hanin, and Dongqing Rushi. It was a standard configuration of a special warfare team, but its function was vague. Deep Dream and Sunset Shadow were top assassins, and they were experts in both stealth and reconnaissance. Du Hanin had the Wind Vein, which made her a natural assassin. After the mutation of the Wind Vein, this senior sister, who had now joined Sai City, not only recovered her strength, but also went one step further. A 27-year-old expert at the peak of the fire-flaming realm was enough to advance and retreat freely in most situations. As for Li Tianlan, his current strength might not be as good as Deep Dream and Sunset Shadows, but in terms of secretive body movements and speed, he was stronger than Deep Dream and Sunset Shadow. Shadow Formula, Desperate Chase, and Night Walking were all top body movement legacies in the Dark World. Now Li Tianlan had integrated the 3 unique skills. In terms of mobility, he could definitely be called the number 1 person in the young generation. There might be many people that Li Tianlan couldn't defeat now, but if he wanted to leave, there were not many people who could stop him. His safety in this reconnaissance mission could also be guaranteed. The only variable was Dongqing Rushi. This genius girl from Jade Pool majored in the 7 sword styles of Jade Pool, Flying Fairy Sword from Outer Heaven and Peerless Sword from Infinite Path. One style was an extremely sharp killing move, and the other was unparalleled domineering, which perfectly matched the sword intent of silence of the famous sword of Jade Pool. But it had nothing to do with stealth. Li Tianlan didn't intend to bring her here at first, but Dongqing Yueshan insisted on taking action with him. With Sunset Shadow and Deep Dream, this mission was basically foolproof. Li Tianlan thought about it and simply brought her here. However, he didn't expect that Dongqing Yueshan, who insisted on taking action with him, would fall silent halfway. Her main personality recovered, and the beautiful but innocent and adorable Dongqing Rushi appeared beside him. Looking at his fiancée's confused expression, Li Tianlan didn't know what he was thinking. "Don't worry, I'll protect you." Dongqing Rushi blinked her pure eyes, reached out to hold Li Tianlan's palm, and said in a clear voice. That voice was very pleasant, very delicate, but with unwavering firmness. Li Tianlan smiled bitterly, took a deep look at her, and said calmly, "Stay with me later." Dongqing Rushi said, "Oh," obediently, and subconsciously touched the quaint long sword beside her. The famous sword Silence. With this sword in hand, Dongqing Rushi was fully qualified to protect anyone. It was no exaggeration to say that if she was determined to die, she could become one of the strongest in the final battle of East Island. The invincible sword intent in the Silence matched her perfectly. Once Dongqing Rushi pulled out the sword, it would be a real invincible strike. That sword strike at the cost of her life was so terrifying. Li Tianlan didn't want to think about it, and he didn't dare to think about it. Li Tianlan narrowed his eyes, looked at the Silence beside Dongqing Rushi's hand, and said nothing. The body of the Silence was quaint, and the scabbard was densely covered with cracks. That day in Jingdu, Dongqing Rushi had already decided to pull out the sword. Although the sword strike was forced back, it basically destroyed the scabbard. However, the scabbard cracked but didn't fall apart, and the sword intent inside it became more and more turbulent. Every time Li Tianlan stared at it, he could clearly feel the surging and mighty killing intent in the scabbard, which was enough to kill all living beings. I won't be able to do that tonight. Li Tianlan looked at Dongqing Rushi's pure eyes, and said seriously, no matter what, don't pull out the sword, understand? Dongqing Rushi was stunned, and looked straight into Li Tianlan's eyes. After a long time, she said softly, I want to protect you. Nonsense. Li Tianlan scolded her with a smile, and reached out to pinch her delicate little nose, while the other hand patted on the box beside him. See? This is sky attack, the sky attack studied by your family. When your godfather gave me this gun, he said that it's a man's duty to protect his family. When did it become my family's turn to protect me? Family? Dongqing Rushi looked at Li Tianlan with burning eyes. There seemed to be some shyness in her pure eyes, but she looked into his eyes bravely. Li Tianlan coughed, shook his head and said, in any case, don't pull out the sword. Dongqing Rushi's eyes moved, and the corners of her mouth gently raised into a smile. She said no more. The business car stopped in the night. There was a T-junction in front of them, and right in front of them was a forest. It's here. Deep Dream turned off the screen in her hand and said, through this forest, the village is 10 kilometers away, and it's also the target of our investigation this time. Let's go. Li Tianlan opened the door without hesitation. The number 3 defensive area planned by Zhongzhou State had a circumference of about 30 kilometers, and there was only one village in this area, but it was the largest of the 4 villages in the whole battlefield. At present, it could be confirmed that a force was stationed in the village, and it was most likely to be a local force of East Island, but no one could be sure which one it was. Once the final battle broke out, at least in the number 3 defensive area, this was definitely the toughest bone to chew, so the strongest reconnaissance team in the number 3 defensive area was assigned to investigate this area. Figuring out their general personnel, the forces they belonged to, and the strength of their high-level personnel was crucial for the next battle plan of Zhongzhou State. In the whole general trend, East Island was undoubtedly in a weak position, but in the final battle, East Island was the strongest party. They had suppressed everything and there was no way out. Whether the major forces won or lost this time, at least there was room for compromise. At worst, they would just lose some elites to negotiate with East Island. But if East Island lost, there would be a series of serious consequences such as the complete loss of the special warfare system, the economic collapse of East Island, and so on. They couldn't afford to lose it all. The stronger they were, the weaker they were. East Island tried to win the final battle, turn the situation around, and get the bargaining chips to negotiate with the other major forces. The other major forces were also covetously looking for a chance to give East Island a fatal blow at any time. The 7-day appointment that Shinichi Miyamoto, the superior of the Invincible Realm in East Island, mentioned was no longer a secret. At least every major force knew about it. Now it was the 3rd day, and the undercurrent in Changdao had become more and more obvious. Not only Zhongzhou State was carrying out reconnaissance operations, but the clubhouse where the elites of Zhongzhou State were hiding was also investigated by the major forces. Almost every day, the places where the major forces were most likely to hide had hostile superiors showing up. Every force was looking for a chance, but every force was restraining themselves. But as time went by, the final battle was getting closer and closer. They couldn't let East Island take the initiative to start the final battle. This was a consensus that every force knew. East Island had now locked the footholds of the major forces, but it kept silent and didn't take any action. This didn't mean that it was cowardly. It just meant that it wasn't fully prepared yet. But the 7-day period was getting closer and closer. Once East Island really took action, it basically meant that it had a lot of confidence. Therefore, every major force except East Island wanted to make East Island fight passively in advance before it was fully prepared. Wasn't the reconnaissance operation of Zhongzhou State another way of probing and forcing? In the silent night, as Li Tianlan got out of the car, Deep Dream, Sunset Shadow, Dongqing Rushi, and Du Hanin all got out of the business car. The 5 of them cautiously entered the woods in front of them at the same time. Be careful, Deep Dream said in a serious tone, Since the other party has occupied the village, they won't let go of the woods. They must have ambushes and traps in the woods. Deep Dream and Sunset Shadow go ahead, and will follow. Be decisive when we encounter any situation. Let's go, Li Tianlan said blandly. The 5 figures moved in unison, rushing into the depths of the dense forest swiftly and cautiously. 1 kilometer. Everything was calm. 2 kilometers. It was silent. The 5 of them moved more and more cautiously. When they went 5 kilometers deep, Li Tianlan finally met the first patrol from the village. But before they could warn, Deep Dream had already killed them. 7 kilometers deep. The number of patrols kept increasing. Deep Dream, who had been moving forward, suddenly stopped. Almost at the same time, the 5 of them squatted down and hid in the bushes in front of them. Through the gaps in the bushes, 30 meters away, a patrol of only 3 people came over under the starlight, looking relaxed and casual. An expert. The pupils of the 5 contracted at the same time. Deep Dream seemed to know one of the 3. She narrowed her eyes and said in a weak voice, "The peak of the thunder-shocking realm." The 5 of them were silent and motionless. The patrol team made up of 3 people walked straight towards the bushes. "Get ready to take action." Li Tianlan narrowed his eyes. The dangerous light kept flashing in his eyes, and he was highly focused. The distance between the 2 sides kept narrowing. 10 meters, 5 meters, 3 meters. The most important expert at the peak of the thunder-shocking realm walked over slowly. He seemed to want to relieve himself, so he directly unzipped his trousers in front of the bushes. Deep Dream, who had condensed her killing intent to the peak, suddenly burst out. But before she could make a move, the deep blue lightning spread all over the forest in an instant. Boom! The air within a radius of dozens of meters twisted violently. Deep Dream's rising figure paused. In their sight, a dark figure appeared almost out of thin air behind the thunder-shocking realm expert of East Island. A dazzling light suddenly lit up. In an instant, the violent sound was almost earth-shattering. Deep Dream did not make a move. The figure that suddenly appeared struck with all his might, and the whole forest seemed to be shaking. The lightning pierced through the sky and shot straight down from the sky. For a moment, there was only the dazzling light in front of everyone's eyes. The shadows of knives and swords kept spreading in the lightning, and the whole forest was instantly filled with violent and decisive killing intent. The moment the light spread, Dongqing Rushi's pure eyes suddenly became bright, and then they were completely covered by the deep blue light. The figure that suddenly appeared disappeared in the light. Li Tianlan's body stiffened slightly. A cold voice abruptly rang out the moment the light shone and disappeared. "What are you doing?" The lightning finally dissipated. Everything happened in the blink of an eye. The body of the thunder-shocking realm expert of East Island had completely exploded. But Du Hanyin, who had been at the end, suddenly took a step forward. She raised the 2 sabers in her hands and pointed the blades at Dongqing Rushi. Li Tianlan turned his head in shock. In his sight, Dongqing Rushi looked calm, but her whole body was close to his back. She held the famous sword Silence in one hand. In the other hand, she held a dagger that Li Tianlan had never seen before. The dagger had been unsheathed. The blade was scarlet, carved with gorgeous and complicated golden patterns. At this moment, the blades of Du Hanyin's 2 sabers had been placed on Dongqing Rushi's neck, and Dongqing Rushi's body was closer to Li Tianlan than ever. The huge power in the field had not disappeared, and the aftermath roared in the air. But the space suddenly quieted down. Dongqing Rushi looked at Li Tianlan quietly. Li Tianlan looked at Du Hanyin seriously. "You're tuning in to the Passion Pages YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.